great. You can do that.
Should we?
We could all move down one, but if we're expecting Frank and Quinn in person.
Okay, let's stay where we are then.
Right.
I'm going to go ahead and kick it off.
Okay, I'm gonna close the outside door. Don't forget you're on and this is on off.
Yes. Good evening. Feels like forever since we, last met. Welcome to the City of South Burlington Development Review Board of Wednesday, September 7th. My name is Dawn Philibert, and I'm the chair of the DRB. And I'd like to introduce other members of the board who are present tonight. John Stern.
Stephanie Wyman.
Thank you. I just blocked on you. Stephanie Wyman. And online we have Mark Baer and Dan Albrecht. And also from the City of South Burlington, we have Marla Keene, who's our development review planner, and our new zoning administrator. Is that the right term?
No, actually, we've changed our department structure a little bit, and Marty is Development Review Planner 1 for the time being.
Okay. Marty Gillis, who's joining us tonight. I'm writing this down so I'll remember in the future. There are three ways to participate, one of which to attend in person, as some people are doing. Another way is online, and the third way is by phone. If you are, attending virtually, we ask that you keep your cameras off and your microphone muted unless you want to be heard during public comment session, in which case you can turn your camera on and raise your hand and we'll recognize you. And we ask that you not use the chat function if you're online because it's not part of the public record and it makes it more complicated for us to kind of monitor comments. We would like to ask you to make sure you sign in the sign-in sheet up back if you're, hi Evan, if you're attending in person. If you're attending virtually, we ask that you sign in with your contact information in the chat function. Pardon me. Excuse me. It's post-COVID hoarseness. Chat function, and if you're on the phone, we ask that you sign in by emailing your contact information to Marla Keene at mkeene@southburlingtonvt.gov. And it's important that you sign in because if you ever want to be considered a participant for any future action, that will allow you to do so. So let's go ahead and start tonight's meeting. Agenda number 1, hi Frank, is emergency evacuation procedures. In the back of the auditorium, there are 2 doors on each side. In case of an emergency, just exit those doors and then you can either turn right or left and you'll be outside. Are there any additions, deletions, or changes in the order of agenda items tonight?
No.
Okay. Item number 3. Are there any announcements or reminders?
Sorry.
No problem. Hearing none. Are there any comments or questions from the public that are not related to the agenda tonight?
I have one quick question. Shoot me down if this is rude. Respecting this whole agenda is largely about Old Farm.
Excuse me, would you please identify yourself?
Brian Armstrong. Sorry about
Okay,
that.
thanks, Brian.
I'm a resident at 50 Old Farm Road. In respecting that this agenda is mainly about the O'Briens and Old Farm Road, I was wondering if there's any chance the DRB would allow me to make one brief statement near the beginning, just to save waiting 3 hours of both your time and my family's time. If that could be considered, that'd be great. If not, I respect the rules of the rules.
Thank you, Brian. What do we think, board? Is there any reason we can't do that?
I think since the hearing's been open, the board's familiar with the project. If you think you can take a comment at the beginning, that's up That's fine with me.
We'll
It's
also
fine with
open
you
it up
guys.
at the end in case there are any other individuals, but I personally think making him wait for 3 hours doesn't make a lot of sense. Does anyone object to that?
I think you're right.
Okay,
I'm fine with that.
okay, good.
I mean, one thing Brian should know is that the other items are either continued or withdrawn. So this is the only agenda item we're hearing tonight.
Right, right.
Yeah, so I wasn't sure how long. And guys, I respect your commitment. Seeing how you grind it out, I've been impressed.
All right, go ahead. Tell us what's on your mind.
Wait. We were gonna,
Wait,
when we get
yeah.
to that item, right?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, sure. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, Quinn. Okay, number 5 on the agenda. Whoops, I think I need my glasses to read this. Continued sketch plan application SD 2211 of Gary Bourne to create a general planned unit development consisting of consolidating 3 existing lots into 1 lot, removing 3 existing buildings, and fully redeveloping the resulting 1.39 acre lot with a 3,500 square foot financial institution, a 2,500 multi-tenant commercial building, and a 3-story 27-unit multifamily building at 760 Shelburne Road. The purpose of this continuation is to invite any additional public comment. Apparently there was a notice deficiency and we needed more time. So I would ask at this point, are there any people here who would like to make public comments about that project? Or any people online? Is that Casey Mack?
I think that's people signing in.
Oh, okay.
But Marty, anyone indicate they want to make a comment?
Any comments? Okay. So now we can close the hearing.
It's a sketch, so we can just conclude.
Okay. We will conclude SD 2211. Thank you. Agenda item number 6, continued site plan application SP 22028 of Rieley Cohen Partnership LLC to amend a previously approved site plan for a 13,000 square foot contractor or building trade facility with outdoor storage. The amendment consists of constructing a 5,500 square foot addition and additional outdoor storage at 4 Harbor View Road. The applicant is working with the state stormwater permitting department and has requested continuation to October 18th. Do I have a motion to continue? Okay. Second. Thank you, Frank. All in favor of continuing the application to October 18th?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed?
Aye.
Okay, the motion is carried. And item number 7, I won't bother to read it because the application has been withdrawn. So that brings us to our main agenda item tonight, agenda number 8, continued final plat application SD 2210 of O'Brien Eastview LLC to create a planned unit development of 6 existing parcels currently developed with 3 single-family homes and a barn and totaling 102.6 acres. The development is to consist of 150 homes plus additional inclusionary offset units in a single-family duplex and 3 family dwellings on 11 lots totaling 23.9 acres, 18 commercial development lots totaling 39.8 acres, and 25.2 acres of undeveloped or recreational open space at 500 Old Farm Road.
You want to let the public,
Pardon?
you want to let the person who wanted to speak.
Sure. I just want to say before we start that in terms of disclosures, I purchased and own a property in Hillside which was owned by the, developed by the O'Brien brothers, but I don't believe my participation would cause me to be biased in any way. And if anyone has an issue with that, just let me know. Okay. Brian Armstrong, would
Well,
you?
let's start by identifying who's here for the applicant and
Okay.
swearing
All right.
people in that haven't been sworn in before.
Okay.
And then if you'd like to proceed to
All right.
public comment.
Who's here for the applicant?
Evan Langfeld with O'Brien Brothers.
Andrew Gill with O'Brien Brothers.
Do you have any other people with you?
Get a strained accent.
I'm sorry, what is your name?
Jeff Hodson.
Thank you. Okay.
Scott Homestead.
Okay, thank you.
Got 3 folks online as well.
Any people online who need to be sworn in, identified and sworn in? Go ahead.
Yes, Joe Mashek with BSB Design.
Okay. Any others?
Corey Mack with WCG. I think I've sworn in the past, but
Okay. Roger?
Yes, I've been sworn in the past.
Okay, all right. Any others? So those of you who have not been sworn in, could you raise your right hand, please? Do you solemnly swear that you'll provide testimony? I'm forgetting the words.
It's been more than a month.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury?
yes.
Yes.
Okay, good, thank you. All right. Now, let's move to Brian's
Madam Chair,
comments.
Madam Chair, quick thing.
Yes,
I forget the protocol on public testimony as far as time limit, as well as trying to have testimony address any new comments rather than restatement of previous testimony.
sure. Well, we always ask that people be as brief as possible, and that if what they're going to say is going to be repeated, that people simply say, I agree with, Ralph, that about his concern about X, Y, and Z. If we have a room, if we believe we're going to have a room full of people making public comment, I think then we try to set a limit on the amount of time people have to make comments. Does that answer your question, Dan?
It does. We're breaking with protocol. I just want to be fair to consistent with the process so that other people don't say, hey, can I testify now?
Yeah.
Because I don't want to
Yep.
wait. That's all.
Okay.
So
It sounds like Brian's going to be fairly brief. So go ahead, Brian.
So first, folks, thank you very much. As a comment, I'm amazed at your commitment, and I found myself asking why I would be in your positions, and I realized it's because you guys care. So thank you for that. I also apologize if any time I've been a little challenging or snarky through this process. It's something that I care very, very deeply about, both this community, the jobs, the real estate, the opportunity to bring housing to a town that needs it. In the last few years that's been this project, the time that I've been involved, I have seen an amazing friction that has been created, and I've saw a tremendous amount of collaboration between O'Brien, myself, and the residents of Old Farm Road, with the hospital and how they're working to balance everything from the bike and pedestrian needs to the concerns of the neighbor. And it really is an amazing process of collaboration that I'm very pleased to see and take place. As this begins the final chapter, I'd love to ask 2 or 3 questions to leave you with. I don't need answers for it. That's not the intent. Would it be too much to ask, in the spirit of collaboration, how the neighbors and 2 major developers or entities are working to transform this entire area? Would it be too much to ask that the city participate in that collaboration by respecting some of Old Farm residents' requests that the sidewalk be only set up so it's done 4 or 5 years out in the development? I think that would be a win for all the people that are going to eventually use it. I think it'll be a win for the neighborhood, and I think it'll win for the developers, and it'll certainly exhaust, in my opinion, other avenues that residents on Old Farm Road, including myself, would explore to channel that. I think it would be the win-win-win, and I really appreciate you guys letting me speak tonight. And again, I'll ask the question, would it be too much harm to wait to the end for the sidewalk to go through Old Farm Road? Would it positively add to the spirit of cooperation? And is it simply too much to ask? Because I would agree to back off on any objections, delays, appeals, all that, as sure as other people would. And I don't say it as a threat. I say that as in, I want to see the jobs that it's going to bring. I want to see the units it's going to bring. And I respect, and I'm wrapping it up now, thank you. It's something we love. It's changing. That's just the way it works. thank you very much for letting me speak. I hope you guys have a productive night. I truly appreciate this exception. Dan, hopefully that was succinct enough. Thank you.
May I ask a question of the commenter? Is that appropriate?
I guess so. Sure.
I have a question for you, Brian. Thanks for those comments. What would postponing the sidewalk installation do? What would be the benefit of that?
One, it would be a benefit of the neighbors being able to have the opportunity to start to do landscaping to better screen it at a much earlier stage. Two is it would, I think, allow the collaboration with the University of Vermont that is working hard with O'Brien Brothers and the Neffs, myself and Doug Dickey, to channel paths and access to Tilly Drive. I think it would better align that option. And I don't think the hospital, and you guys know more of this than I do, is slated to begin or planning to begin, if everything goes through, till the 24. So I'm not sure, is another slight question back, if the need is there that this be the first project. The other thing I'll remind everybody is the stores not generally open after 6 or on the weekends. So opportunity to screen, a little bit more time for the neighbors was something that they love, while not, at least in my perspective, any adverse impact to another party in the process.
Thank you. Appreciate your.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Just to be clear, so currently the sidewalk is proposed as part of the initial build out, and Brian's asking that we allow it to go out 4 years or something like that? Yes. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
What's the why do you want to screen the sidewalk? What's the motivation?
I hope you guys laugh at this. I'm in real estate. Real estate has treated my family well. I have loved and cherished Old Farm Road for almost 25 years. I believe it's appropriate that something is going to be taken from me by the same industry that's given my family so much. There's something poetically perfect about that. So with candor, I don't want to see all these new people walking up and down the street. I've enjoyed so much privacy, and I respect that is singularly focused. But hopefully you see as well in my passion for this and is I'm trying to find that win-win-win. So I'm not saying, I mean, again, you guys are eventually going to go without it. I can try to grind it through all that stuff. I don't want to do that. I'm just asking if other neighbors, which I think echoed an email that was similar to this, concur with requesting that it was towards the end. Can we ponder the question of what harm it would cause to honor those requests? Not the request of one, several. And to further collaborate. You saw me speak up in favor of the hospital last month. I'm trying to work with this town needs this development.
Thank you. Any other questions for the? And in fairness to any other members of the public who don't want to wait 3 hours to make their comments, we'll give you another chance. But would anyone else like to comment now? Okay.
Yeah, I just to follow up, and because I think this is an important point of how land use works, and especially you as a real estate professional, Brian. And I there's no disrespect intended, but when you bought the house, you knew where the property right away was, right?
Yes, but if we're going to go to brass tacks, I got 6 weeks notice, and we got a constitutional question there of who the applicant is and who isn't on there. So I absolutely know that. Doesn't mean as a member of the public, I wouldn't try to exhaust more extensive measures. Why would we do that? We got a chance for a win-win-win. You got UVM working, you got O'Brien's working, you got the people on Old Farm Road are saying, made this request. As correct as you are, Dan, what win would that have compared to what win could honoring a request have to extinguish the more and make this development more timely. I believe the O'Briens would appreciate it. The neighbors would.
I'd like
really appreciate the time.
I'd like to interject. I think that some of the board members are stepping over the appropriate limits of questions for people who are making public comments. If the questions are clarification on what they're hoping to achieve, this is not public testimony. This is public comment. You know, you're welcome to ask challenging questions of motivation and incentives of the applicant, but that's really not the appropriate thing to be asking public commenters.
You just said that it's appropriate to ask questions to get information.
Right,
A member of the
but
public is offering-
did you know this? I think it's over the line. I think John's question about what would it achieve is a clarifying question. I think we need to limit it to that.
I just want to say that I think this is a very important issue.
Right, but if just to dive in there, if Mr. Armstrong is going to bring up indirectly a policy solution because of how Vermont's land use legal frameworks allow projects to be on hold for years, then it's equally appropriate for us to say, okay, well, if it's a policy question, it's a policy debate. He's opened the door to a policy solution, and which means things are played out in public. And so I, as a member appointed by the city council who represents the broader public responsibility, this is not a discussion over the fine points of a thing in the LDR, then I think it's perfectly appropriate for, he's offering it. It's no different than an engineer or a developer saying, well, this is our vision, and we can question that. So we're not to be silent in the face of public comment. By and large,
It is different in that an engineer or an applicant is the party proposing a project. It's the board's responsibility to decide on the weight of the evidence how to interpret the regulations.
Right, and we will do that, but it's appropriate that we can also ask, like I say, he opened the door to a policy debate.
And I'm sensing Frank has a comment. Am I correct?
If we're done, it can wait. I would like. Yeah, I'll make my comment. Mr. Armstrong started out with saying he had a question. He stated his question. His question has been restated several times. No one's in doubt about what the question is. I take the question as one directed to the developer and not to us. And the meat, so to speak, behind the request is what Mr. Armstrong says he is not doing, which is the leverage of further procedural steps. So I'd like to try to end it by saying Mr. Armstrong has made his request. I have no doubt the developer understands what it is. It's for the developer to, and since I don't see that we have an investment in the exact timing of when the sidewalk gets built.
Well, that's been discussed at previous meetings, and I'd be happy to rehash it. But there is some board written decisions and previous discussions that are relevant to the timing of the sidewalk.
I'm sorry. I didn't know that.
Don, can I just weigh in real quick?
Wait,
Let me.
hold on.
Can I finish the thought? Therefore, to me, it's a question of the developer weighing the cost of accommodating the request versus what it sees as the effect of the leverage behind it, which of course is procedural delay. And that's all I heard here. And I may have been missing something, and maybe Marla knows what it is, but I don't know what it is, why it matters one way or the other. It's a matter of the developer's judgment, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, but the board has made a judgment already in this. The board has, in their preliminary plat and in their discussions at previous meetings, made a determination on when this path needs to go in relative to the bulk of the
Okay,
development.
and then I stand corrected on that.
Can I weigh in real quickly?
Sure.
So, did Mark want to let Mark go first?
Let's let Mark go first, Evan. Go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to say that, I think Mr. Armstrong has made his request. He explained his rationale behind it. And I think that, this is something for us to discuss further during phasing discussions and deliberations.
Right.
It's not really a developer kind of request or question. It's more of a board deliberation request.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, Evan, go ahead, and then we're going to move ahead with this.
Sure. I was just going to provide, there's a little bit of context too, because there are two connections to Tilly Drive, one of which I think we're going to talk about a resolution on the UVM Medical Center property this evening in terms of timing on that, in terms of timing on the Old Farm Road sidewalk. So, I appreciate what Mr. Armstrong said. We have been since the condition was levied upon us at preliminary plat last fall, we've been in direct conversation with him trying to find a resolution to this. We've discussed with staff, and we hope to have a continuation of discussion with staff as to trying to find a resolution to an existing appeal. We're under appeal right now. That's not a threat of appeal. There's an appeal that is currently sitting on the project as a result of this.
Okay. All right. Do you, shall we proceed with the staff comments, or do you have any very brief comments to make before we start that?
No, I think we've got 3 hours to talk, so I don't know that we need to do it.
Do you want Frank to move in back of you again?
No.
I've got a bad neck, so I don't know if I can turn around, Frank.
That was a little creepy all around. Right? So,
Folks, thank you very much. I appreciate your dedication to the process, that you're here because you care, and for letting me speak tonight.
Thank you, Brian.
Thanks for speaking your mind. It's all right.
Okay.
And I appreciate the candor.
Okay. Comment number one. First of all, I want to thank Marla for all her good work and the way she structured this report. But the suggestion has been made that we spend the first hour and a half going through the staff comments and hearing the applicant's responses to those. And then we take a brief bio break, as we've decided to call it, I guess, and come back and spend the latter part of the meeting talking about the proposal for the C1LR zoning district and what you folks have in mind. And you can kick that off with a little presentation for us. So I think that's how we're going to go ahead and proceed. So that takes us to comment number 2. And this one is about are the recommendations of the traffic impact analysis and bike and ped study fully included in the plans? And I guess that's a question to you guys.
Sure. So I asked that of Corey and Roger, who wrote them, who are both here. I guess that they could, briefly confirm what they confirmed to me, to you all. That makes sense. Corey was the author of the bike and ped study, and Roger of the TIA.
So that's a yes, Andrew.
Yes,
Okay.
I believe they are, but they can confirm that they're on the call.
In advance of that, does it make sense just to address the conversation that we've been having with UVM Medical Center regarding the Tilly Drive connection?
Go ahead.
As part of that. So
That's
we,
sort of above in the staff report, like just above?
yes, correct.
Okay, thanks.
So we have been in direct discussions with them. We've come to an agreement with the UVM Med Center on lot 6 that they currently have before you guys, and a cost-sharing agreement in terms of building that. So I believe it's now on their plan. They proposed something to us. We've consented to it in terms of cost-sharing, and we've come to a conclusion. So I guess it's just before you guys in terms of when they present that site plan to you.
That's great. That's good to hear.
And that'll be the next DRB hearing on September 20th. I just got those plans this afternoon. I haven't had an opportunity to open them yet.
Thank you for your honest work on that. Okay, so
I don't know if it's as easy as Corey and Roger saying that yes, but they're here, so I think Roger's only here for this comment, so we might.
do you
hear
have
from him.
anything to add, Roger? And
No, not at this time. I did review the preliminary plat approval and everything that was in there, and confirmed that all the plans reflect the conditions that were in that approval. The one thing that is not on a plan is a future changing of the phasing at the Kennedy-Kimball intersection to split up Kimball and Bayberry. so that they don't go simultaneously, but rather separately. That will improve future level of service and safety at that intersection. It's a very minor change to the traffic signal. It's not something that we would normally have a plan to show, but rather a written specification. I also confirmed that that's something that will be triggered by commercial development down the road, and would propose that it be dealt with as part of our ongoing traffic monitoring and site plan approval process of those commercial lots.
So did you say one of the roads is going to be called Bayberry?
No, that's
That's the treetop condominiums.
Right. Okay,
Bayberry
that's what I
Drive.
thought.
Yeah.
Okay.
Opposite Kimball.
Right.
So this comment was subtly different than the question Roger answered. There's a traffic impact analysis and bike ped study as part of this final plat that makes some recommendations. And the question here is whether the recommendations of those two final plat documents are incorporated into the plans.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay.
And yes, this is Corey Mack from WCG, and I'll just jump in right after Roger and say that we developed a set of recommendations for bicycle and pedestrian safety throughout the site. And as far as I can tell, everything that we put in there has been integrated into the site as closely as possible. So it looks great on my end.
Thank you, Corey. Okay, moving on to number 4. This is about needing a proposal for home expansions because of the density.
Oh, we skipped 3, and 4 is sort of a little one to follow the big one
Okay.
that is 3.
Let's go back to 3. Staff recommends the board accept the applicant's proposal for removing a portion of the right-of-way lot coverage from the computation of lot coverage within the R1 PRD zoning district. Sorry about that.
So this sounds very technical when you read it, but this was the discussion of the zoning district has a maximum coverage of 25%, but because there are so many roads required within that zoning district, they have very little left over to build homes with. So they were asking if they could consider part of the right-of-way as not towards their coverage. And so the board said, yes, generally that seems like a good idea. And so they've provided some math and said the area that they'd like to consider as not counting towards coverage equals the area of things in the project that are not roads and are not homes. So recreation paths, sidewalks, parking areas, that sort of thing. And we, as staff, thought that was a good idea, and we're hoping you guys would agree.
What do you think, board?
Question, have we done this kind of thing before with an adjusted calculation or?
No. It's never come up. No one has been this
I think
tight before.
specifically we looked at, I'm not sure, were sidewalks in the calculation, Scott?
What we looked at, excuse me,
Can you use the mic?
what Andrew and I discussed using.
You have to push the button to turn it on.
There. What Andrew and I discussed using was the area of like public amenities that actually aren't in the right of way, that like cross the lots, and then taking that equivalent amount out of the lot coverage. So that was sidewalks, rec paths. There was an area where, for instance, the rec path along Old Farm Road, where we discussed swerving it into the lot. And so that was like adding lot coverage.
So the gist of it was to provide a better site design and provide elements that wouldn't otherwise be required. You were asking for credit for that in the right of way.
Exactly, right, which I think is, like things like the pavilion at the barn lot, like that roof is coverage, or the rec path that crosses the barn lot, or even I believe we included the alley that serves the homes on Old Farm Road, because that added an enormous amount of coverage, but it was done at the request of the board for a better site design to enable those homes to not have garages facing the street. So those were the items we included in that number, were basically the things that we were either asked to do by the board to improve the project, or which were like a direct public benefit, like a park pavilion or a playground or some other form of coverage like that.
And does the board have the flexibility under the LDRs to do this?
It is a creative interpretation that we feel is not explicitly addressed.
Okay. Board, what do you think?
I'm sorry, what was Marla's answer? I didn't follow it.
I said that it's a creative interpretation that hasn't been explicitly addressed in the LDR. It's not prohibited nor permitted.
Wait a minute,
Well-
but there's a coverage standard, correct?
Yes. And the coverage standard is silent on whether impervious surfaces that are within the public right of way count towards lot coverage.
I see.
Personally, I would, and I'm gonna defer to Marla on this, but having some experience with land use regs, it's lot coverage is typically thinking abstractly in terms of here's the parcel, it's this many square feet from corner to corner to corner, and you got your lot coverage is your house and your driveway and your patio and your front steps and whatnot. And mentally speaking, I don't think I've ever heard people say, oh yeah, but the part of the sidewalk, like where I am over near Rice High School, I've got I've got a sidewalk right on my property. So I kind of like this especially because that's lot coverage that the owner doesn't really even own, meaning the street and the sidewalk. So I like this, and hopefully it'll lead to further reform in LDR writing.
And just as a reminder, I pointed this out last time. This issue was exacerbated by the fact that when the inclusionary zoning piece was put into it, it didn't account for the additional lot coverage that the inclusionary units and the offsetting bonus units added to the requirement. So in the P1 or the R1 PRD, we only have 25% lot coverage, but we have an additional requirement on the affordable housing piece that we're putting in there and the offsets that it's allowed, but it didn't account for it in the lot coverage.
It's been a challenge to facilitate the project. We've had a lot of friction with coverage, from everything from that bike path jog to, the extending of the Barn Road cul-de-sac all the way to the property line. It's gotten to the point where these little things are tipping the scale, right? And so I think the idea here was that those things are clearly being requested by the board. They're clearly a public benefit. And so why not try and, achieve a better design? So we're definitely supportive of it. We're hoping that if the exception is granted, we can add a bit more parallel parking to some areas of the roadways to help, alleviate some parking concerns. We can accommodate the rec path jog, the extension, and we can also leave some room in the PUD for future owners to, put a 5-foot bump out on their living room or whatever they might want to do down the road.
So it sounds like you don't want to be penalized for adding some of the amenities that we've asked you to add.
It's just, we're like a couple 100 feet from the limit currently, to the point where if we jog the rec path, we lose a unit. We lose a unit, we go from 155 to 154. 10% of 154 is 15, 10% of 155 is 16. So you lose an affordable unit if we lose one unit. And so that we're at this point where these requests are just coming to a head over a jog and a rec path or 300 feet of additional coverage. And so that's sort of the impetus of the sort of creativity.
John, go ahead.
I have a couple of questions. So if we were to approve this extra coverage, does this allow for more homes? Or are you locked into the number of homes regardless?
Right. We're not seeking an increase in the number of homes. We're just looking to open the coverage so that those future additions, changes, accommodating the requests of the board. So there's no additional units being proposed.
But if I may just, you're also trying to avoid losing units.
Correct. I think we would even be open to a condition that said no additional units are allowed under this. It's to allow for, so you don't have a bunch of angry homeowners in 20 years that are pushing back on this when they're trying to put additions onto their decks or whatever.
Okay. Second question, this parallel parking, and this may be kind of a strange question, or absurd, but you're not proposing or would not propose, hey, we're going to allow parallel parking on the street because we're not putting in driveways in these homes in order to build bigger homes. I'm assuming every home will have a driveway. so-
Exactly. Yeah, we're not proposing any. Right. Exactly. The parallel parking was considered. We could add a few more spaces on Maple Way, which is the longer road on the east side of Old Farm Road, just to help with pull-offs for the mail truck or the UPS guy. Because a lot of times that's just useful, but it's a couple 100 feet of coverage on a project that's pinched, and so
Right,
that's why.
and from a kind of a pedestrian experience, the city had requested or staff had requested, and we have now proposed that on the units on the east side of Old Farm Road, that they are rear loaded through an alley, and that alley created additional coverage that driveways wouldn't have. So we actually created a condition based on feedback that we got from staff that has actually exacerbated this again, in addition to that jog in the rec path.
I've seen housing in urban areas where there's no driveways and it's all parking on the street. And I'm just hoping Vermont doesn't go this direction.
We would not be pushing for that. That would be a.
Thank you.
I wonder if we allow it, whether we can frame it to, there's a language challenge a little bit. If we could carve it in such a way so that we can put the 56,000 square feet, in other words, in a special category, and limit what could be done with it.
Is there something you wouldn't want to be done?
Well, an additional units, for example.
That's a pretty easy condition to write. I think if you start saying, it has to be used for public amenities, then the minute somebody wants to expand their porch or put on a second bedroom because their mother-in-law wants to live with them and they can't because they don't have additional square feet of coverage, I think that's, I don't know, I think that would be challenging to implement. From a zoning perspective, when we have these developments where people have footprint lots that go right up to their walls and we have to tell them, no, you can't put on a small addition, it's a pretty miserable situation to be in. And so this additional 56,000 square feet would allow for that, as well as these additional minor tweaks that Andrew's talking about.
Patios are the biggest one that we see. I mean, in Hillside, since we've sold the houses, there's probably 30 people that have put a concrete patio off of their back deck. It's just an easy, nice thing. And to not have that ability, I think would long term, it would certainly be frustrating for folks. But I think your idea is fine. I think the language is great. What I would propose is we don't actually know the final coverage number yet because we haven't adjusted the rec path or we haven't done all so I think we can, if it's sort of like we're open to this, we can finalize all the drawings, we can finalize the coverage numbers, and then whatever excess is there, you can condition to be used for, not developer units or something like that.
Can we live with that, Board? Pardon me. Okay. Let's move on to number 4. What would this solve the issue of people wanting to expand their homes? A sunroom, a patio, a porch.
Yeah, I think, that was a question for us, how to track this or administer it. I guess what I would propose is we could track, there's a lot of things going on in this project. So for one, we don't know what floor plan is going on every lot. So there's like 23 different footprints that people can buy. There's a range of which ones fit on which site. For the purpose of coverage, we've used the biggest footprint available on any lot to calculate coverage so that we know that if everyone buys the biggest home that's available, that we won't be over. So
That's the same way we approached Hillside as well.
So there's
And that's already the way you're calculating it today. Yeah.
That's the way we're calculating it now, right? So I think as the project's built, smaller homes may be built. We can track the precise coverage, as the project is built out, and then we can leave, either the city or I propose to put it on the HOA to say, as part of approvals for future additions, which you're going to have to approve anyway, you need to make sure that coverage is available, and you need to demonstrate that to the city for zoning permits. And here's how much coverage you have as a starting point, and something along those lines. But
part of what I was getting at is so the first expanders, so to speak, potentially is that's how I kind of like not just to have the 56,000 feet out there to be grabbed by the first users, you know.
Well, I think that's why it would be governed by an HOA board that's elected by the homeowners.
Yeah, this is a real problem on, a lot of PUDs throughout the city. The one that comes to mind because it's relatively small is where Jim Langan lives. That development off sort of south of Overlook. They have a very limited amount of available coverage within their PUD, and every time someone wants to add a porch, we need to have their HOA run the math, and it's coming down to who was in first.
Well, and that's exactly the point I'm trying to get at. You know, the latecomers will be squeezed down to no flexibility, and I guess I would like to see that since we're shaping something as a matter of unique policy anyway, or original policy, maybe we could shape it a little further to put ceilings on. I don't have a complete grasp of it yet. I mean, the most obvious example is, you're taking an average 360 additional square feet, unless the first 50 people have used up 90% of the available square feet. You get the drift.
Yep.
It's really about fairness.
Well,
So it's just some sort of. I've said it. I don't have the language in hand.
Well, there's 150,000 square feet of right-of-way area coverage. So we chose 56 because it correlated with the improvements. You could certainly choose a bigger number that would allow people more flexibility. I think the likelihood of seeing expansions larger than 350 square feet on any given unit is probably pretty slim. And we could look at assigning some kind of coverage expansion on a unit type. Like if you're living in a small townhome, you're probably not going to be able to put a 300 square foot bump out on your home in reality. So maybe we have to get a little more granular with that.
I really hate to go more granular because future versions of you and I are going to be pulling their hair out. But I wonder if there's something in what you said about each home is in your calculation is currently considered the largest footprint. And if you don't build the largest footprint, maybe there's something in there. I don't know. Give it some thought. We'll table it and see if we can come up with something.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Okay, number 5. Why is there space between garages and homes for those couple of homes?
Marty, can you pull up the packet?
So,
civil plans, probably just the overall site plan is fine.
we talked about this. Scott and I talked about this a little bit. I think that we can adjust that distance and get it to about 10 feet between the garages and the homes.
Why is there any space at all?
Well, so it's the same home as the home that's proposed along Old Farm Road, right? So we obviously, didn't want to develop a whole new plan for 4 houses. This was that area where the stormwater pond sort of crept up on us. It wasn't supposed to be there, preliminary plat. We're trying to keep an alley load situation. We developed, some really nice 3-story facades to put on the stormwater pond side facing the 4-way intersection. And I think, if you look, the sidewalks are a bit back from the arching one, and we can expand that to a 10-foot distance. It's just a detached garage. It'd be a good spot to put a little stone patio with some, overhead lights or whatever. I think 5 feet is not usable. It doesn't make any sense. 10 feet, I think, actually creates a nice private outdoor area where you can have a grill or whatever. So I would think, that was my takeaway was let's push this to 10. And, it'll be a nice feature for folks.
Board, any concerns about that?
So you're going to provide some revised plans at some point?
Yeah, we'll
Or we could probably do it as a condition.
Yeah, we're going to definitely have to get you a new set of plans so we can incorporate that change to the new, updated plan set before we close this out. If that works for everybody.
Okay, let's move on to number 6. We need an updated phasing plan.
There's quite a bit in the phasing section.
Yes.
So yeah, we updated the phasing plan and submitted it in the middle of August. It doesn't appear as though the specific updates made it, because these comments are from the July hearing. They're just reprinted. So that we did make some updates already that we can explain to you guys. But that's certainly not a problem. We will update the phasing plan before you close the hearing.
Coming up, so we can discuss that later.
Yeah, and this is not.
Do you
an
want to
issue.
give sort of a, I don't know, maybe it makes sense to do it one by one. I intentionally didn't incorporate your comments because I looked at them briefly and I said, oh, these are answers rather than changes. So I thought maybe you would just want to explain them.
That's fine. Yeah, we can just walk through the comments because they're, and we can explain what we did to address them in the new plan.
Marty, do you want to pull up the phasing plan, please?
There's absolutely no issue with updating the phasing plan before you close the hearing. We'll take care of that. We already did it. We'll update it again after tonight.
And while that's happening, Marla, on page 5. The paragraph in black, the top paragraph, next to last line, and recommends they be rephrased on the phasing. Is that what you intended? Rephrase.
Page 5. Sorry.
Top paragraph.
Top paragraph.
Next to last line on that paragraph, the last 4 words, rephrased on the phasing plan. Is that what you intended, not rephased on the phasing plan?
Since the C1LR phases are not proposed to be part of this final plot application, staff considers no additional phasing triggers to be needed for the offsite improvements, and recommends they be rephrased on the phasing plan to be indicated as when warranted.
And that's correct.
Yeah, so the idea is there's a bunch of phases that are off-site, and those are not going to be triggered until parts of this Eastview development that are not proposed for final plat approval are approved. So there's no sense in including them in this final plat approval because they can't do them anyway.
Okay, but it's rephrased.
That was one that we already did, so we
Whoops, next question.
So if we want to go back, kind of start at the beginning, Marty's got it open, and we're talking about phase.
Give us an overview.
So
of
yeah,
phasing.
phasing is, I mean, I think that this is kind of where we were talking about at the beginning, right? The project is broken into a bunch of phases, and the phases include roads, and the phases include homes, and then the phases include the stuff on the bottom of the page, which is the IC stuff, the industrial commercial zoning district, and the stuff on the right-hand side of the page, which is the C1LR, the commercial stuff. It also includes the public recreation spaces, and those are kind of integrated into the residential phases. And then it includes the roads. And so at preliminary plat, the board had some big picture conversations about phasing. The applicant generally wants to construct the homes first, which, makes sense. And then the board had pretty strong opinions that, some of the public recreation spaces and some of the infrastructure needed to be early in the project, both to make sure that the residents who live there have the benefit of commensurate amount of infrastructure and amenities, as well as not having those folks live in a construction zone for 5-10 years. And I think the applicant agreed with that. They specifically talked about how they try to work kind of back, when you're mopping your kitchen, you start in the corner and you kind of mop yourself out of the room. Their phasing plan is intended to do that as well. So when we were talking earlier, one of the things the board said is, well, you're bringing in 155 homes. That sidewalk on Old Farm Road needs to be part of that, because otherwise you have changed the character of the neighborhood without the commensurate changing of the character of Old Farm Road.
So that gets back to our earlier discussion.
Right. So that's sort of the big picture of how the phasing is. Homes with appropriate infrastructure to go with it, and then C1LR, and then IC, I think, in that order. Maybe the way around.
Sure. So I can, sort of fill in a little bit more there. I mean, essentially the C1LR and IC are kind of up in the air as to which will go based on demand, but they're both sort of available. And, in total, just to sort of look at it in the big picture, we think that the residential build out, the 155 units, would be somewhere in the 6 to 7 years range in terms of total timeline. So we're not anticipating this to be a 2 or 3 year build out. The first, the phasing sort of goes in order as it's listed on the left hand side. So the Leo Lane phase being the first major residential construction phase on the west side of Old Farm Road, sort of butting up to the Hillside neighborhood, and then proceeding from there over to the orange phase, Daniel Drive, Barn Road, and that area in there, and then proceeding from there sort of north along Maple Way. So building out to the north and then tying in the blue phase on Old Farm Road, and then, sort of the last phase being the uphill townhomes on O'Brien Farm Road extension. So you're basically sort of starting on the west side of the road and then looping around from south to north is the general sort of feel for how construction would proceed, just so you guys sort of can envision it. And then mixed into that, there are the things that we were requested to do during a residential phase. So you've got the barn pavilion construction, you've got the relocation of Old Farm Road, and then you've got the improvements along that roadway. So that's sort of the high level. There's a phase there in blue off of Kimball Avenue that you can see in the IC district, which we're calling like a staging area phase. So that's our plan, is to stage construction down there. It's got easy access. It's off of the residential streets. People can get in and out without, trucks causing an issue, and then they can use internal roadways to access building sites. That's the area where we're proposing to sort of remove some ledge in order to facilitate construction of the road, to store that down there, crush it on site, and repurpose it in the roadway construction. And then there's a fill area proposed down in the black below that, as just an on-site place to deposit fill, so that we're not having to truck it however many, hundreds of miles off-site to approved places. It's just a massive amount of emissions and truck trips for something that we can deal with on-site, so we thought that was a good idea. So that's like a high-level overview, and then I guess it makes sense to dive into the the open items.
Okay. Number 7. And I'm going to read this. This is about the infrastructure completed. When will the infrastructure be completed in relationship to the construction of new homes?
I could take a little blame for this. I think we got ourselves into a little bit of a mess with the proposal we made at preliminary plat. I think there's a lot cleaner way to do this. So what happened was we said we're going to start building the barn on the 20th zoning permit, and then we'll finish it. I think I don't think we gave an end date, but we said we'd start it, and then we would at the 20th zoning permit we would start construction of the barn, and we didn't give you an end date. And so you said,
the barn constructed already?
So like the pavilion and the plantings and the sitting areas and those things. And so you guys had requested, well, when are you going to finish it? Start it at the 20th zoning permit and tell us when it'll be done. And that just seems a little complicated. It gets a little messy, because if we started at the 20th permit and then the market falls out from under us, we don't have any sales, say we don't sell another home for 2 years, and now all of a sudden we're having to construct the barn even though we've only built 20 homes. I think it'd be a lot cleaner, to the purpose of this comment, what's an easier way of doing this? And so what we proposed was to just say it'll be constructed by the time a certain zoning permit issues. So not a concern when we start it, but at the point that we want X permit, it has to be done or the permit doesn't issue. Just seems like a lot cleaner way to do it, and it gives us, if we know that 100 sales is enough to generate the ability to construct the improvement, we set the thing at 100 zoning permits, and we know whatever happens in the market, we've already, accounted for that can proceed with that. So that was our hope, that we could sort of look at just an end date rather than a start and an end and
Can I ask you
timing in between.
a question, or the next question in my mind, which is, when would you then propose to have it be complete?
Yep. So I had a chart in the letter that we submitted that
That's
sort
the
of
thing that's at the
outlined
beginning of the packet.
key areas. And so what we proposed in the updated phasing plan, it's on page 3 of the letter that we submitted. It's just a general sort of highlight. I can just tell you because I'm looking at it. So
Pulling
it's
it up.
the lot 18 open space, which is the sort of green space at the. That might make sense to actually still leave the phasing plan up.
We have the technology. We're going to do both. I know. It's still that same document. It's just a different page of that same document that you were in.
Impressive.
Yeah, and then go to the one that says phasing somewhere. That one, 123. That one, I think. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, so if you zoom in, so what we were proposing, the lot 18 open space, which is it's a sort of open field on the left-hand side of the west side of Old Farm Road. If you zoom in a little bit, you can see it there. It's in the Leo Lane phase, the red phase. We were proposing that would be complete and open at the 30th zoning permit. So we would, seed it, turn it into a lawn for people to go play on. The lot 19 open space, which is the natural playground area that's on the west side of the road, so the north end of that block. That's the tree fort, the slide, the sort of sitting area. We're proposing at the 75th zoning permit. We proposed the barn lot open space at the 125th zoning permit. Relocated Old Farm Road at the 125th zoning permit. The open space playground area. This one, it could go either way. We said the 400th zoning permit, although I didn't want to use zoning permits. I wanted to use trip ends because I feel like there's commercial development mixed in there as well, and so it might be a more appropriate mechanism.
Which one's that?
So that's the big playground off the end and the dog park in the green phase over by Kimball Avenue. So the intention has always been that large park would be associated with development in the C1LR area, right? So the residential development in this proposal at the 30th zoning permit, it has a large green open space. At the 75th permit, it has a large park with a playground and a tree fort. At the 125th zoning permit, it has a picnic pavilion, parking area, sledding hill, open space lot. That is essentially the open space that's associated with the 155 units. I think that's a proposal in line with what you requested. It's arguably substantially more open space than the 125 units would otherwise require. I mean, Hillside has one park, and it's 115. I think that's sort of where we landed and what we proposed.
Sure, John, go ahead.
A couple of questions. So the first two are complete at, and then the third one is complete by. Is there a difference?
No, it's just a typing issue. Yep.
And then that Old Farm Road sidewalk complete by 400. I assume there's a long sidewalk, and you're going to do portions as you build out the homes. Is that kind of what you're suggesting, or?
Yeah. So there's so. I'll address the 400th zoning permit issue in a second, but there's a portion of Old Farm Road. The majority of the improvements on Old Farm Road are done on our property, and then there's a portion that is the one that is caused the appeal that's off of our property that's at the south end of it, and so that's the portion we're talking. Yeah, that's the portion that we put by the 400th zoning permit. This phasing plan was submitted a while back. We've been in discussions, negotiations, trying to resolve this appeal for quite some time. So we had proposed to push this thing as far back as possible to give us the most leeway in trying to resolve the appeal. I think where we are right now in our discussions with the appellant who spoke earlier is that if we can get this to a reasonable period of time, we're going to be spending a lot of money landscaping and screening his property and other properties up there to get it to a point where they're not going to be staring at this new sidewalk. But the other piece of this is that, again, there is a separate access to Tilly Drive, of which we're also committing to build. So there's been, there's a lot of moving parts to this connection to Tilly Drive that are underway. And there is also a piece that's just pragmatic that, we have 155 homes, a significant amount of affordability included in that we're trying to move forward, and we're being held up by this one sidewalk issue. So we're trying to work with the board, we're trying to work with the appellant, we're trying to get the houses rolling forward at the same time, and we think we've come to a happy middle ground here. I mean, it's up for the board to determine, and I don't think it needs to be determined this evening. I think would like some more discussions with staff to try and garner their support on it, but that's where we are currently. So I wouldn't necessarily get hung up on that 400th zoning permit issue, because that's not our current intention.
Yeah, and we had we had originally used trip ends for the lot 47 and the Old Farm Road sidewalk because we wanted to tie it to the C1LR, which has a lot of commercial potential, right? And one of the findings of preliminary plat specifically required that we use zoning permit issuance as the trigger, so that's why we put it on the 400 zoning permit. I think it makes more sense for the lot set 47 open space to be tied to trip ends. So, the residential phase, like 120 trip ends. Because if we start developing commercial development in the C1LR, you would want the park to be required at some point. If we build 200,000 square feet of commercial space and not a single zoning permit for a residential unit, a dwelling unit or whatever, you would never get the park, right? So I'm just saying, let's say a couple hundred trip ends, something that we can pick, that is indicative of both. If you do residential or commercial, you're going to have trip ends, and once you reach a certain number, you have to build the playground associated with that area.
So are you saying that the zoning permits that you have to pull for the commercial spaces wouldn't count towards this count?
It's just, it's like, so I suppose it would, but you would only need one zoning permit for a 200,000 square foot, office building. And so, the demand doesn't really correlate necessarily. It just feels like you could wind up, so that was a board condition. And, so you guys have to direct us to say we'll accept trip ends instead of a zoning permit. And I think we can propose, 50% of the trip ends from the C1LR. We have to build the associated park or somewhere in there, something like that.
Quick question on the, just to put it in context here, what's the total number of anticipated zoning permits in the end?
Well, so this final plat proposal is for 155 homes. I guess the duplexes would only need one. So do you do those as two or do you do those as one?
No, it's one.
Oh, this is true. Yeah, we do them as one. So this whole thing would get confusing by that reasoning as well.
Huh. I guess it was intended to be zoning permits for I got a little, as Andrew said, I think we all kind of confused ourselves. The intention was supposed to be the zoning permit for the 30th home, for the 75th home, for the 125th home. So the duplexes would count as, it wouldn't be the number of zoning permits, it would be counting the number of zoning permits that have been pulled for homes, whether those homes are in multifamily or single family or duplex.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay, so then that's the home trigger. So how would we ever reach the 400?
So I think Andrew is saying, keep in mind the C1LR is, we'll hear about it later, but largely envisioned to be residential with some commercial components. So we would get to 400 homes when they started building out the C1LR zoning district.
Yeah, if you think about in the Hillside master plan with those 6 commercial lots, we have 458 residential units available to us, and we have a much bigger spread of the same density in the C1LR zone because it's also 12 units per acre. So that's
Okay,
really
I'm,
where you
I'm
get
trying
the
to figure out roughly what 400 zoning permits is X percentage of what final total number of anticipated zoning permits.
It's I believe there's maybe 450 units total in the PUD, somewhere along there.
All right, so can we
So
start?
your proposal is essentially waiting until we've got roughly 50 minus 450 till we've got 85% build out.
Well, so that wasn't my proposal. Was that you
I
were
get what you're
requiring
getting
a
at.
zoning permit number, and I didn't want to give one, and I was required to in order for our preliminary plat application to be complete. So I gave you a high number and asked that we reconsider it to do trip ends instead. So I think and I said specifically that I thought this number would be a non-starter for you, but I was providing.
Yeah, and I'll just agree that it's a non-starter only from the standpoint of the sidewalk is there for the public benefit of the public that lives in the development, as well as the public that is walking through public right-of-way to get to our utopian and highly desired goal of more walking and biking, et cetera, and connected neighborhoods, et cetera. So I certainly would like to see a lower number than 400. I don't know what that number is, but yeah. Or some blending, some combination of housing units and or square footage or commercial, because presumably people who work in the building might want to go somewhere. So.
Is the question of trip ends something we have to propose or something you have to propose? Who has to propose that question?
We can propose it. We just, if you're in agreement that makes more sense as a trigger for I'm specifically talking about the lot 47 park space. I think the sidewalk on Old Farm Road is sort of its own issue. But our intent was the lot 47 park space should be triggered by some amount of C1LR development.
I tend to agree with Andrew. I think that it makes sense for the first three certainly to be triggered by the number of homes for which zoning permits have been pulled, because those spaces are integrated into the single family duplex area. If you guys want to consider trip ends for the rest, I think that's doable because those final plat applications will have to give us a trip end, a TIS update, whereas single family homes wouldn't come with a TIS update, so it becomes a tracking nightmare.
Mm-hmm. I think that makes sense, and sorry.
Did that answer your question, John?
Yeah, yes, thank you.
Go ahead.
And just to confirm, just because we outlined permit issuances and preliminary plat doesn't mean that we can't change it to trip ends now. Like, is that dicey at all, or?
No, I think the phasing stuff in specific was, here are the objectives, meet the objectives.
So it's okay if we change the threshold.
It wasn't a final decision. It was, this is the preliminary phasing plan that needs some work. There are other things in the preliminary plat decision that I wouldn't say that about.
Okay. Just wanted to confirm.
Building on that question, I think we just talked about home sales as opposed to zoning permits.
Well, we don't track whether they sell something. It'd be whether they apply to build a home. And if they sell it or rent it, that's none of our business.
But again, in the duplex question, each one, how does that?
So we would change the language instead of zoning permit issuance to be zoning permit issuance for the 30th home, 75th home.
We can do that, is what I'm at.
We can do that.
Okay.
Okay.
How do you guys feel about the proposed timing for, call it the first four? Let's table the bottom two. That's, I guess, sounds like.
So largely, the last two at the 175th home, 125th home would be sort of like most of the homes are constructed. If the market goes sideways and they decide not to build one of the streets at all, you're still getting those open spaces. That's what that 125 represents approximately. Whereas the other ones are more like pretty early and then halfway through.
That was our take. we felt like it was kind of a good balance. It gets something out front, leaves us something a little bit further out to sort of get some sales and.
But then
recover.
it doesn't allow them to like withhold the last zoning permit just because they don't feel like building the park. 125 is still a viable, like they still need to build 126 in order to make a profit or whatever.
We still need to build 30 more homes, and we're not going to walk away from that, 30 home sites to avoid building a pavilion and
Just to let you behind the curtain a little bit, you don't make any money on these projects until you get to the very, very end. So, I mean,
walking away with 30 homes less is not a viable opportunity for anybody.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's kind of one of my concerns is, if the market does tank at some point, does this run out and then they can just say, okay, we're scrapping the rest of the project.
Right. And so the
what
question for you
prevents that
guys
from
is,
happening?
is 2 open spaces, lot 18 and lot 19, enough to support 125 homes? And I think that the example Andrew gave earlier about, the number of homes in Hillside and 1 open space might be a good point of comparison. You could also look at other developments. We could provide you some stats on that if you wanted.
I think it would be. I'm just curious, so I'd like that. Yeah.
Would the barn lot open space still be an open space even if the barn didn't have all the fancy amenities? I mean, it's kind of there anyway, right?
Yeah, I mean, the city would have an irrevocable offer of, well, it's not intended to be public, but they would have I'm sure as a condition of this permit, you're going to require us to give you an easement for that public access we talked about. So you would have it anyway, regardless of if something were built.
Thank you.
yeah, and to be clear again, that it's the trigger is that it's completed at those. It's not starting at them. So, none of this stuff happens overnight. So the market slows. I mean, we're already underway on building these amenities.
All right. Are we good to move on at this point?
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to prepare some deliberative stuff for you guys on this, and I can do that for their next meeting, and so you'll have that information before your next meeting because you're on kind of an every other meeting cycle.
Great.
Okay. Good. Let's move on. Number 8.
I'm going to try and speed up, guys, I promise.
So
That was the hardest one.
Pardon?
That was a hard one. I think we can
Yeah.
get through a few
Okay,
quickly.
so number 8, the applicant objects to this condition for the same reason they object to condition 4 above, and staff's recommendation is the same as above.
So just to clarify, the condition that this is talking about is triggers to begin construction of O'Brien Farm Road extension shall be tied to zoning permits for the IC and C1 LR districts respectively. So our objection to that is just that O'Brien Farm Road extension has a bunch of homes on it in the R1 district. So it can't be tied, starting the road can't be tied to zoning permits for the C1 LR because we have 15 homes on the road that are in the R1.
Probably be helpful to pull that site plan up.
That was all that we were getting at with that. I think we accommodated it in the new phasing plan, and I think it just is a miscommunication. So I think we should be.
I think it was 123 was the phasing plan.
So yeah, if you zoom in on the on O'Brien Farm Road extension, which is the brown phase, all that we're saying is that we want to build O'Brien Farm Road extension when we want to build those homes that are on it. It's fair that it's also required if we want to build a development on lot 28 or lot 29 or lot 30 or whatever. But it also needs to be allowed to be built to facilitate the homes, I guess was what we were trying to clarify. And that's the way we've proposed it now, that we can start it at any point in time to facilitate home construction, but that it would be required to be built at the point that lot 27, 28, 29, or 30 was proposed for construction. I may have added 25 and 26 in there. I can't remember.
But I think the thinking also is that, if we were starting construction on a lot that was fronting on the Kimball Kennedy corner, that wouldn't necessarily trigger the construction of O'Brien Farm Road if we weren't prepared to do something on the lots that are being built off of it.
Right. Like lot 22 probably doesn't need to trigger the construction of O'Brien Farm Road extension. So the way that we set it up, I believe it was 25, 27, 29, 30, 28, or any of the homes fronting on O'Brien Farm Road could be the trigger to start that roadway construction.
And you understand that we wouldn't accept it until, there was a decent number of homes on it.
Yeah, it's the story of our lives. Got a lot of roads at Hillside with a lot of homes on them that are unaccepted.
I have a question for you guys. I just noticing it now. What's going to happen to lot 30? What is that about? That strange lot that doesn't have a direct connection to a road? What's that doing?
So we're going to talk about the C1LR quite a bit, and this lot configuration is a little bit up in the air given that conversation. So it might be good this lot configuration sort of represents a site plan that we developed before we redid the whole thing to accommodate a bunch of feedback from staff and everybody else. So that lot wouldn't be there under our current proposal because we've improved it, I think. So it might make sense to just table that till the C1LR.
In other words, don't take that configuration seriously.
It's really that lot, but the second half of this hearing is devoted towards
They're going to
discussing
show you a
layout.
new concept in an hour.
A lot of people didn't like that lot. So
Where,
it just
would you show me where that lot is, please? 30, I can't read.
this irregular thing right here. What is that doing? I don't.
well, it was, there was a little bit of space there that could have been like a small, like a Starbucks or something,
Could have been a cafe in the middle because you had larger multifamily buildings or a hotel there, and then you had this kind of smaller commercial retail.
Oh, that was all right. Designed as a little commercial.
Yeah, a little island there for people to kind of.
In between the residential. Right?
Well,
Or is that all commercial?
Well, we're showing our city streets here. We're not showing the private streets that provide the traffic flow in between.
Well,
those
and
commercial
regardless, it's all
but
thrown out
it's
in an
all
hour anyway.
sort of unnecessary to talk about.
All right.
So it sounds like we're good on that. We can, in that context, adjust the phasing.
So just a time check. It's 8:24. We spent a lot of time talking about the bike path or the pedestrian path. We are not going to get through all of your comments in the first half of this meeting. What should we do? Should we continue to go through the comments and get to what would have been the second half of this meeting at the next meeting?
I think it'd be great to get to the second half of the meeting, but we've still got, if we consider that we go till 10 o'clock, we've still got half an hour. We could do the what are your burning questions question.
Okay.
And then maybe skip back to 9 if they don't have anything.
Okay.
I don't know. Is that
So
sound reasonable?
let's do that. I'm conscious of the time. So let's take a break from number 9 where we're leaving off. And in order to help you folks, are there any burning questions that you would like to talk to the board about and get some feedback about before we go back to number 9 if we have time, or proceed to talk about this to the second half of this hearing?
Yeah, so I think 50% of trips other as a metric will be. I think that on number 9, I think we already dealt with it. The rec path, we proposed something that's going to work for that. So I don't think we need to talk about that. I think the staff reviews our new proposal. We've tied it appropriately. We've fixed the issue. So I think it's all set. So I'd say let's just skip through that. Comment number 10. I'll just give you, our high level view. I think we've addressed it. I think, Scott's here. We're getting a stormwater permit, and we're going to have to accommodate that permit in our phasing. I don't think there's any issues with that.
So I have a question. I don't recall ever asking an applicant if they had a construction general permit. Have we? I mean, is this a new thing?
No, the question here is because the construction general permit on a project of this scale typically limits, stop me if I say anything wrong, typically limits the open area at any one time. So, a whatever acre project, 102 acre project, they're going to say, the state's going to say you can only have 20 acres of land disturbance at any one time. And in order to open another acre, you have to close an acre.
Okay.
So the question is whether any of their phasing is going to be incompatible with what the state says their maximum area is going to be.
Our feeling is no. And, you know, so I think we're good.
I can talk about it real quickly if you'd like. We have a plat where I'm working on this permit now. And we're going to be getting what's called an individual construction general permit, which gives us a lot of flexibility in asking for how much area is going to be disturbed. And I've talked to the likely contractor for this project, and we were thinking along the lines of asking for 10 to 15 acres total, but like 5 in like any one place. So that we might have, 5 over here, but 5 over here with a total limit on that. And he thought he was comfortable with that, and that's probably the way we're going to be moving forward.
And that big construction staging area isn't more than 5 acres all by itself?
So once that's going to be big, that staging area will be all gravel almost immediately, which is immediately considered stabilized.
Got it.
Okay, thank you.
So we think we got it. I think we can get through these comments actually
Okay.
in a half
Let's
an
go
hour.
for it.
I think because I think they get a lot easier than where we started.
In number 11, I think there's a missing word. It says staff supports this comment and recommends the board require the applicant what is meant by. I think there's an infinitive missing to explain or to.
Well, you can guess what it should say, can't you?
To explain?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
I think
Describe,
Okay.
pick one.
Right.
we can change that wording. It's included on a couple of phases that are residential phases. And I was just including it to try and reiterate that, like, if the phase is just homes that we're trying to sell, we should really be able to start it, stop it, end it, sort of as we are doing the project, without a lot of restrictions, right? So, like, all the public improvements have their own phase, the parks, the open spaces. This was included to say, hey, if I want to start the 12 homes on Old Farm Road, we should be able to start them if it works with our stormwater permits and phasing and home sales and everything. That was kind of the point, and it could certainly be
I think the
dialed back.
concern in creating these was that, I don't expect you guys to do this because it's not economically viable. But the thing an unintelligent developer could do is they could sell whatever home somebody wants. And they could sell one home on Maple Lane and one home on Leo Lane and one home on O'Brien Farm Road Extension. And then they build all this infrastructure and then they go belly up. And then we're stuck with like one home on a big long road and then another home on a big long road.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why there was some degree of like, get somewhat through one before you start the next one. But I think that you guys would do that anyway.
Yeah, well, what we also try to do is offer a variety of different home types, but we try and do it by opening up the most minimal amount of infrastructure possible, because it's just, it's not sustainable otherwise. So I think it is self-governing.
Does the phasing not address that?
It does, but they're kind of asking for us to get out of their way and just let them do business the way they do business. And what do you guys think about that?
Which was the case at Hillside, that we didn't have these restrictions and we proceeded through it logically, and it just, that's kind of a good summary.
You're very reputable. You have a lot of experience. It doesn't seem like you would be foolish enough to do something other than the way you've been doing it, because that works. And as you said, the financial viability issue in terms of the infrastructure is real. So I don't have any concerns about that. Other members of the board?
I mean, if there's some clarifying language that could be put in there, it might be good. Management might change. Maybe they're not so intelligent.
That's
next
true.
month,
Right.
You set the bar high.
Any time prior to or after completion of is completely meaningless.
It means whenever.
When you feel like it is all it means, right?
Well, and I think the concern here is that if we need to open up a phase to get to a market segment, we need to be able to do it.
Yeah.
You guys want parks, you want roads, you want these things, and if we need revenue and sales are slow on two different products, and we want to open up a third phase that has a different product, like that's a business decision. And I think getting into that, it sort of risks the viability of the whole thing to sort of be hamstrung on business decisions. So there is some trust there, but that's the hope.
I think there's also another piece of this, which is just over-regulation and over-management by staff. I mean, are we over-regulating something that doesn't need to be regulated?
Look, there's a general problem with a project of this scale. And I think you guys have been fairly patient. On the other hand, I think so has staff and the board, which is that there's an inevitable conflict when you have, quote, planning versus on-the-ground practical decisions that a developer is making. A lot of it, in fact, depends on the skill and experience of the developer. But that line drawing about where to draw a hard line from a planning perspective is very difficult. I think we all recognize that, and we're trying to work with it. But in the deliberative process, we'll just have to decide where that comes out. And I think your advantage is we know who we're dealing with.
I think we're comfortable on this point. I think staff kind of understands us and understands what we're getting at.
Can I ask a question? Just
Sure,
out of
go ahead,
curiosity. So when they open up a phase, are they required to build the entire road and all of the infrastructure for that entire road prior to constructing like the first or second home? Or are they able to kind of piece it and say, okay, we've sold the first 5 homes on this road, we're going to put in the infrastructure 50% up and then not construct the remainder of the road until they know that they're going to sell the other units on the other half of that road? Like, what's the phasing with that?
I would say it's a little bit of both. Sometimes, the utilities have to go in for the entire street section, but at the same time, you don't want to be putting in sidewalk and curb that's going to get run over by excavators. So it's sort of a balancing, and those are the kind of the decisions that need to get made on the project side, and I don't know how you really can effectively regulate that.
Well, and the tool that you use to regulate it is that we bond for the cost of constructing the entire road before we build the first unit on it, right? So each of these phases is its own bond. And so if we were to start a phase at our discretion, the city would have a surety that would enable them to fully construct the phase should we go belly up or management change or we walk away from a half-built road with 5 homes on it. So I think there is that security. That's the sort of thing that gives you guys the assurance the whole road will get built.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other questions? Number 12. This is, and I have a question about this. This is about constructing the sidewalk concurrently with the Old Farm Road improvements. When you, the sidewalk, is that the lower part that our discussion was about? Okay.
I think, I think 12 and 13, if we could table that like we were talking about earlier and revisit it after the, I think
okay,
we'd like to circle back to that at the next meeting.
Let's move ahead then. Number 14. This is about redesigning the central common space and relocating the utility cabinet.
Oh yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah, I think these last two are kind of the two that we would actually appreciate some guidance on. And so we can get through these and then that'll be the full report and we can.
Let's see, is there a good plan to show this?
It does show up in the phasing plan if you.
Yeah,
that.
It's a better one though. Oh, try L100.
I have a question. Well, Marla and Marty are looking for that. The homes on the west side of Old Farm Road will go up to the hillside property.
Correct.
Is there going to be screening between the back of all those homes so that the hillside homeowners aren't looking at the backside of the west side. I forget the name of the road, but so you're going to have two rows of homes in different developments. Will there be screening for visual division between?
This is
there's
a good plan to show it on. If
Yeah, there's quite a bit of space there. I don't think that we've proposed any firm screening along
Okay.
that line. I don't know. I think we have another hearing where we might be talking more about the details of the landscaping plan. Where, there was no comments specifically to that. Landscape budget values and all that. That might be a good time to sort of get into that. But
I did look at it a bit. I didn't have a lot to say about it. Mostly looked pretty good.
yeah, we didn't propose screening in that area. We are, a few $100,000 over the required landscaping minimum already.
Okay.
In what we'd proposed, and so there were some choices to make there. There's quite a bit of grade change between the homes.
Well, and what's not shown is all the footprint plantings, right? Each home has
Yeah.
some like home, your rhododendrons and your whatever.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, similar to the hillside plan on the back side of the homes. I mean, on the single family cul-de-sacs where they're tiered, each of them has a planting plan that backs up to another home.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
So this stuff.
There are some trees that you can see there. There is some limited screening where the homes are tighter. You can see the screening there. So we did,
Right.
try to put some in where we could. It's, I guess, really just the north end that doesn't have it.
All right. What are we looking at here?
If you go back to the L100, sorry, up at that top corner. So this is that kind of cottagey area. And the board's direction at preliminary plat was to arrange these homes around a central common element. Our take on this when we were writing the staff report is that the central common element is sort of this lawn area between the homes and the street, but also, they are arranged around the street. The problem that we saw, and this is like super fine detail, but it seems like they are arranged around a utility cabinet. If you zoom in even more, there's like a little square in there. Yeah, that guy. So, can you just move the utility cabinet down the street?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I think we can. We might need two, one at each end, but there might need to be.
Or make
one.
it like the world's most fun utility cabinet. All the children are going to want to
We'll
climb
get
on.
Tim Barrett's wife to paint it like she's done to the rest of them.
I think there might need to be two, one over by Old Farm Road and one over by the rec path that comes up from Hillside, but to facilitate the conduit runs at the appropriate distance, but we can do that.
Okay. Good. Let's move on. Next comment, number 15. This is the habitat connection. This comes down to the habitat connection versus a separate rec path. Some people want to see a habitat connection there, but there's also some interest in a rec path.
Yeah, so you like my crazy color diagram here?
So we had proposed an alternate layout here with the new rec path alignment. It might make sense to look at, I believe on the 19th, we submitted a new landscape sheet. I don't know if Carolyn knows the number or what. It would have been one of the exhibits that we submitted on the 19th was an updated landscape plan just of this spot. Oh, it looks like it's L111. It might be in the packet.
I don't think that we saw that, but Marty, you have the landscape plans open, right? That's one of those things.
Or maybe it was just a single sheet we submitted on the 19th, I thought, but it would be on, there was a civil plan in that area that showed it as well, that we submitted on the 19th. Oh, yeah.
Is that the
That's
revised one?
Yep.
Okay. No, I don't think we saw this.
So with the rec path moving up the page, we reoriented the running trail, and redid the planting plan to accommodate that orientation that brings the rec path to the hospital's project, in the new orientation. thought it was pretty successful. I mean, you know, do you guys want to speak to this at all, Carolyn or Jeff? Or
Do you still have a sidewalk and a rec path next to each other along Potash Road?
no? So the rec path is up at the top now, and
Uh-huh.
it's just the sort of gravel path that you can see.
And
There's
there's a
nothing next to the
sidewalk
road.
on Potash Road on the other side, or is there?
Yep.
So like
On the
the
east side.
upper side of Potash Road, there's no sidewalk.
No.
Got it.
Hi, Carolyn.
Hi. Yeah, I mean, I think you've already discussed that the trail is just been reconfigured so that it kind of meanders through, and then the rec path connects back up to Rieley. And there is a wildlife corridor in there, and we've got a lot of native shrubs and trees that we're putting in there, pollinators, trees and shrubs that attract birds, berries. Yeah, all natives.
Good. Okay. Anything else about that? Board members?
I think the short answer is we tried to do both. You know, we had direction from the board to have the two paths. We had direction from the committee to do the pollinator plants and keep the wildlife corridor. So we feel pretty good about it. If you
Okay.
guys feel good about
I
it.
want to know why those wild turkeys aren't coming around anymore.
I don't know. You might want to talk to the resident trapper there.
Okay, number 16. This is regarding the specifics of accessibility on areas where there are stairs.
Yeah, we looked at this.
You look puzzled.
I think if Corey's still on the call, you know, Corey looked at this extensively. Could speak to it if he's still there, but I think we've covered
am,
it.
yes.
There he is.
So as we all know, the site is has many paths throughout the whole site, and most of them are accessible, and they've been designed to be that accessible. There are various features along many of these paths. Many of these so-called pause places with benches, quiet, introspective, low traffic areas that really capitalize on the view sheds to have a place to stop. And those are all accessible. There's some of the larger parks, and those all have accessible features to them. There's a couple places where there are stairs, but that's really just to integrate the park features into the hillside landscape, really capitalizing on the landforms. I think that accessibility has been provided throughout the site in an intentional way.
Thank you. Does that satisfy us, board? Staff? Yep. Okay. Number 17, I'm going to read this. Staff recommends the board discuss with the applicant whether there should be temporary overflow dog parking available in the C1LR district, as overflow from the dog park will likely occur in that area once it is constructed.
Does that make any sense? Now that you read it out loud, I'm like, oh, that's not as clear as I meant. The idea was before the C1LR is constructed, maybe there should be like a little gravel area that people can park.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
So it wasn't.
That didn't make. I
It
didn't.
wasn't a permanent. You were just saying prior to that build out of the parking areas. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's reasonable.
Well, we know South Burlington loves its dog park, so.
I was going to say, in the context of the comment, when I met with the dog park committee about the park, parking came up. And, the idea, which I explained to them, was this is more for people who live here than for folks driving in. And so I think there is a limited amount of parking there, but it's not really meant to be a destination dog park for the city. It's meant to serve the residents who can walk from their office, apartment, house to the park. And so we had 7 parking spaces previously. We now have 3, which I think, are ADA accessible, and we added 4 on-street spaces on O'Brien Farm Road to make up for the other 4 that we lost. So we still have 7, adjacent parking spaces. So I think, and the temporary lot makes sense. That seems fine. but we can definitely accommodate that.
Okay. Thank you. Number 18.
But
And
if
I-
you're, wait, sorry, just thought, going back to phasing, if you're not building the dog park until you start building out the C1LR, maybe this is, yeah.
I guess it would depend where the development was. You know, if there was a bunch of development on the north, you know, Kennedy Kimball corner
Okay.
of C1LR, it could still be available and,
Okay.
you know, an issue. So
Sorry, thanks, Don.
if there's a big field there, we are happy to have a gravel parking lot in it until there's not a field there for it anymore.
Okay, number 18 really invites a presentation about the C1LR. We're going to put that off for the second half of this meeting.
That
I think
the
that's
second
it.
half.
This is, yeah.
Now, when you say that's it,
That's the beginning of the second half. Everything after that
Okay.
is second half.
okay,
We did it.
perfect, nice. What about 19? Have we addressed that?
No, so that's C1LR. Everything
Okay,
18
everyone,
and-
okay, perfect.
18 and later is C1LR.
Let's take a 3 to 4 minute break and we'll see you back here.
I'm just wondering, so the South Burlington School, you're already down the new school. I don't even know if that new school is 200 million, if this thing fills in.
Yeah, no, the schools are.
So I'm going to start by asking you or someone from your team to give a little overview to this whole issue.
Yeah, we can talk about that elephant in the room in deliberations, but the school district has.
And we will be stopping at 10.
Saying that they will not sign off on the ability to search for apartment buildings.
How's your summer?
Good. You?
Yeah, good. A lot of travel. Been away a lot, and it's been great. Glad to be back now, though.
So my question has always been, why would anybody travel from Vermont in the summertime?
Well, that's a good question, and it just so happens that the traveling I've wanted to do. Last year, I went to Switzerland for 2 weeks.
I don't know
fall,
that it's
so
been
I
in the
missed a
news.
lot of the good fall, and this year
But
I was
Stephanie
away in the
knows 'cause she's
spring, so
working on
my
a
garden
project.
has really suffered. So it's just a choice,
Right. Yeah.
Because although I don't think Vermont is so great in July, I think it's too damn hot and humid.
I loved it this year.
Oh, did you?
I did. I'm at a point where the heat agrees with me much more than the cold does.
Yeah, I'm gonna move south when I retire.
Well, I like to move south for February. I'll tell you that.
All right, I think we can. Do we need to resume recording?
No,
Okay.
Okay, I think we can
So,
just start back up again.
Thank you, everyone. We're going to really focus during the rest of the meeting on the C1LR district, and I'm going to open it up by asking Andrew and Evan to give us a little overview of what the issue is, what the plan is.
I'll just introduce Joe, who's on the call, who's our planner extraordinaire. And I think we're going to have Joe and Jeff sort of talk about the concepts. Maybe if you just skip to the next slide, I can sort of introduce the area. So this is a rendering that shows sort of the neighborhood that's proposed for construction, and these fields that are in the lower part of the neighborhood that don't have anything shown. That is the C1LR area. And so I think the staff report did a great job of introducing sort of the challenge here, which is, how is this area eventually going to take shape? What are the parameters that we're putting in place as part of this PUD overview? And what work have we done to sort of ensure that there's a viable plan here that works to develop this integral part of the project? And so I think, those sort of questions are good ones. And, we've put a lot of time into this, especially over the past 2 months. We've worked with staff quite a bit over the past 2 months, refining what we submitted, back in April when we filed this final plat. And so I think we've gotten to a good spot. We're excited to sort of share it with you guys. And so I'll just kind of kick it over to Joe to sort of introduce the current concepts that we're sort of framing the development around. And then, we're going to have Jeff and Carolyn speak to sort of aesthetically how we're going to integrate all of this, together through the landscaping and sort of site appearance. And then there's a little bit at the end about regulatory next steps, which unfortunately is the part that I get to talk about.
If I may, for the purposes of orienting people, this road here on the right-hand side, no, further over. The far right? The far right, yeah.
Oh.
Keep going.
I don't think I can.
Okay, well, that's Kennedy Drive. And then the road that kind of swoops down from the left to the bottom is Kimball, correct?
Exactly, yep.
Okay. And the reconfigured hillside is the one kind of in the center.
Relocated Old Farm Road is in the center, and the old orientation is where those trees, which are, exist.
I'm sorry, which is Old Farm Road?
Old Farm Road is the one that goes right through where it says O'Brien in 2022.
Okay.
And the old orientation of Old Farm Road is where the mouse is now. So that's showing the new orientation.
Right.
And then the existing hillside residential phase is the upper right part of the picture. The larger multifamily buildings on kind of the mid-page right are lots 10 through 14. 10 and 11 are the two mixed income buildings that Summit is teed up to break ground on shortly, and then 13 and 15 are the horseshoe shaped and boomerang shaped buildings along Kennedy, and then there's 12 and 14 are the two remaining just to the north of them.
This is
on the
very
page.
helpful, by the way. This
It
is the
is,
first time
yeah.
I've seen this.
This is a city. Good God.
Okay, take it away, guys.
You still there, Joe?
I'm here. I'm here, ready to go. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, if you can move it to the next slide, I agree. It was a really, really helpful slide to orient everybody. And it also somewhat depicts some of the challenges we have on the C1LR. So we started this process, well, a couple of years ago, actually, and started looking at different concepts and different ideas. And we always had the challenge of what do we do with the topography? If you can move to the next slide, we'll show you the concept that we arrived at. On the just to orient you guys again, north is at the top of this map. So that's the corner of Kennedy and Kimball. And then as you move down to the lower right, as you move kind of down and to the right, yep, that's right there. That road there is Old Farm Road that cuts up the new orientation of Old Farm Road, connecting across Kimball into the office parks to the north. So the darker orange part of the map is, we'll just start referring to that as, we'll just call that Lot 1 at this point. I know it's not very glamorous, but that's really the town center. And that was where really our main challenge was, and where we spent a lot of time working through how we handle the topography, how do we handle the connections both to the neighborhood and to the larger community, and how do we work with the regulations and kind of the multiple goals on presenting to Kennedy and Kimball, and also to the new alignment of Old Farm Road. We went through a lot of different concepts. And about 2 months ago, we met with planning staff, and it was really a good discussion, because where we were always at is kind of looking at this as separate lots and kind of the commercial viability, and how do we take this thing down, and how do we create a dynamic core for the neighborhood and for this part of the community. And as we were pushing buildings around, fronting them onto Kimball, fronting them on Kennedy, we're always stuck with this very large parking area in the center of the site that was essentially tiered like rice paddies with different parking areas. And it just wasn't coming together. And a couple of months ago, when we met with staff, the question was asked, well, what's your concept? And so we laid out our conceptual goals, which were, creating a vibrant town center, a diverse mix of uses, multiple connections to the community, and a viable destination town center. And it was clear we didn't have that with the earlier concepts. And so we put our heads together and thought of this area, both the town center and then the more of the yellower areas to the south, and organizing it around what we call a living street. And that's the street that parallels Kimball, it's at the dog park at the south, and then as your hand goes up to the north, it terminates on an axis for essentially our anchor commercial space. And so in looking at that, we were able to break up the parking zones so that we didn't have one big mass of parking in the center of the city. And then we started looking at, what does the periphery look like? What are the goals of the parking regulations, and how do we present this to Kennedy and Kimball? And we arrived at the fact that we're about 20 feet above the corner, and you're not going to see any of the cars. And there's already a really nicely vegetated slope there that we could essentially enhance with additional landscaping with, and Jeff and his team will get into this in a minute, but we can really present more of a naturalistic soft edge rather than a hard urban edge corner. And in doing so, we were able to focus all of the attention onto that living street, which is in the center of the plan. And what that does is it really creates a dynamic commercial space and residential space to the south with pedestrian zones and outdoor cafes, multiple uses of the both retail and multi-use buildings with residential above. All organized around a central plaza that could serve as event space, perhaps for for art fairs or craft fairs. You can convert some of the parking areas to expand the fair idea, and so you really start to create an exciting space that's flanked by multi-use buildings with residential above, retail below. And in the case of where your hand is right now, that building and the building at the corner of Old Farm and Kimball could also accommodate parking below. So subterranean parking. In the case where your hand is now, we'd have retail facing the living street with a parking garage at the back. So we'd be able to screen all of the garage parking from that central core. So, and what we did was, what this plan did that really made me happy is that we were able to create not only a pedestrian living street that connects the dog park and the regional trail to the south, but also we were able to connect to what we just talked about, Lot 15, as far as Phase 1 in the hillside development. So we're able to create a pedestrian connection to that area, and then also to Kennedy and the areas in the downtown. So you could essentially walk along Kennedy, walk up to the space. You could drive into the space from Kimball to and Old Farm Road. Now the dynamic edge that we're looking for is primarily on Old Farm Road and at the corner of Old Farm and Kimball. And as I said, we've got a softer edge along Kimball and Kennedy, which would be heavily landscaped. And we'd also have pedestrian connections that would need switchbacks up to the parking area. And Jeff has come up with some really cool ideas on how to do that. So moving south to the other side of Old Farm Road and the other side of the living street, it becomes more residential. Right where your hand is now, we've got what would be a semi-mixed use building. There would be a potential to have either retail or community space on the first floor of that residential building. And what that community space could be, it could either be co-working, which is really popular right now. It could be retail space if that becomes viable, or it could be retail space and community space. Maybe there's a room that could be reserved for neighborhood meetings, for anything like any kind of more community event space. Those are also multi-story buildings, parking underneath. There would be parking exposed to Kimball on the lower level that would be screened and adorned properly to the standards with glass and brakes and exposure to pedestrian exposure and pedestrian entrances to Kimball. And we're looking at probably 4-story buildings above the parking, with more of an urban space on the Living Street side and a softer edge on the Kimball side with landscaping. Where your hand is now is a detention facility, so that would be planted with native grasses and things like that. So The edge along Kimball, again, is a very soft, more of a landscape edge. The edge on the inside is more urban, with urban patios on the first floor of some of the units as you move south, and an urban plaza about where your hand is. And actually where that urban plaza is where that funky lot 30 was, to give you some orientation. And that's what happened earlier. So instead of having that as a separate lot, we've included that into the residential development and created an urban plaza to create a place for residents to gather. Again, it could be a spot for, pick up music or something like that. Any number of things, just providing a space for the residents to gather and be outside. Between the orangey residential buildings and the yellow, there's also another pedestrian trail right there. And as you go south, there's another pedestrian. If you go south of behind the yellow, the brighter yellow, there's some open space between the yellow buildings and the orange buildings with another pedestrian trail and pedestrian connection that connects the dog park, a secondary connection to the dog park and the town center and areas to the north. Again, the garages are below the buildings, and what we've done here is tried to create a design that was practical and functional, but then also picked up a lot of the grade here so that we're not, so we're essentially tucking the garages into the hillside and moving up. And so as you're on the residential side, you see just the residences, and then the parking areas would be exposed on the north side. What I really like about this plan is that where your hand is now with the yellow, those are row houses, essentially townhouses that would have a lower level garage facing the higher density residential, and having a two-story facade on the residential side on the Two Brothers. Is that Two Brothers or O'Brien Farm Road? That's what that is. So they would have a two or potentially three-story elevation on O'Brien Farm Road, and a lower level garage in the back with an auto court that faces the green space and secondary trail that connects all the area up. The imagery just below that, with the two-story, the three-story row homes would be facing the residential. We've got contemporary style we're looking at, but could be anything as we go. Some of the other imagery that's shown on the board, lots of outdoor cafe space, treating this as an urban town center, but really being attuned to what the space between the buildings are. So how do these things all knit together? The pedestrian space on the living street, is that wide enough? Yes, it is. We could have cafes in front of the spaces, or like a bookstore with sales out in front. So you can really start to utilize both the indoor and outdoor space. The plaza, right where the Kennedy label is flanked on the south side by what we call it's essentially a small retail. It's like a pop-up retail. Could be anything from like a seasonal use, perhaps. Maybe in the winter it's a ski shop, in the summer a bike shop. Could be any number of things that just adds a vibe to the streetscape.
We have lots of other imagery as well here on future slides. I don't know if it makes sense to advance a little, because there's plenty of other photos and stuff to.
Can I just ask that you make sure you talk about what of it is what you're proposing and what of it is an example of what might be proposed? And maybe that's in here, but I just want to make sure.
The photos on that first slide are potential. This is really more of a graphic imagery. The spaces themselves are defined by the living street and the footprints. the character images are on this slide are character images. And Jeff and his team have been really, really diligent and done a great job of hashing out what that space between these buildings can be.
Yeah.
And I guess I'll hand it over to him at this point, him and his team to describe how these areas are designed.
Yeah, if you go to the next slide. So we took, and now we're turned around again. North is down. Sorry. I'm so used to looking at this plan with Kennedy and Kimball where they are on this plan. But so basically, we zoomed into the west side of Old Farm Road just to kind of see what the detailing might look like for this. And, you know, we don't know what retail is going to go in here, but, you know, we're kind of setting the stage for a successful commercial and residential street. So we're making sure that there's sufficient sidewalk space. So we've got a generous sidewalk space on each side. If we start at Old Farm Road, there'll be kind of a special intersection with crosswalks to the east side and a change of materials. As you enter this new living street, we've shown kind of a gateway feature, in which we'll have to figure out exactly what it is. You know, it could be an archway, it could be just some columns, or you know, maybe that's where some of the signage is for some of the retail that's down the street. But what we want to do is kind of break up the space, materiality, you know, maybe have different material for the parking spaces to break down the roadway. This would also lend itself to what Joe was saying, if there's, you know, a special fair going on, or if, God forbid, we have another pandemic and they need bigger outdoor dining areas. You could kind of take over some of those parking spaces on a temporary basis. But what we really wanted to do was create this special street that went east-west. And, you know, we've got, I think, 15-foot wide sidewalks with a collector strip. If you go back up to now we're in the weeds. There we go. You can zoom into the street. That's great. Yeah. So basically, there's a collector band. Well, there's a 15-foot wide sidewalk, you know, between the building facade and what I'll call the tree band or collector band. So it's a generous sidewalk with, you know, since we don't know what businesses are going to go in here, we don't know what sidewalk use will be like, but we want to make sure there's room for cafe tables, merchandise, you know, things other than just people circulating by. And then a generous kind of amenity or tree band where there'll be street trees. You know, we're going to make sure they have good living conditions, if that means soil cells or structural soil, so that we get a nice tree canopy on the street. And then, as I mentioned, the parking, the angled parking on both sides, you know, may be a different material. It could be pigmented concrete. So it just starts to break down the roadway width and make it feel more pedestrian and more user-friendly. And then I think Joe mentioned the kind of special retail area, we're looking to create kind of a gathering space adjacent to that with some sort of central feature. I won't say fountain, I won't say sculpture. It'll be something, you know, that we'll figure out when we get into the further design of this area. But I think it's nice to have that adjacent retail. You know, it just makes it more active. If it is a restaurant, there can be tables and chairs out there. We'll have some raised planters to kind of define that space. And then if you continue on that street over to the west, to the right, it starts to connect down to Kennedy, which I'll get into on a later slide. But so really just trying to show some more detail for this area so that people get a sense of the character.
So on this slide,
Yep.
if Marty were to zoom all the way out, would we see Kimball at the bottom right
Yes.
corner?
Yeah.
So this is the corner of Kennedy and Kimball.
Yep. Yeah.
So it kind of reminds me a little bit of the movie theater in Williston and that whole area.
A little bit.
With the
It's going to be nice.
the bandstand, but there's a lot of vacant property there.
There is.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. So, I think, this has the benefit of all the development that's coming before it.
Sure.
But in very close proximity. So, I think that was maybe a little bit of the cart before the horse when they developed that first, and now Finney Crossing and everything has started developing.
And I think what this does nicely is it has a combination of parking orientations too, whereas, not to denigrate another development, but that is entirely focused in with the parking all on the outskirts.
Yeah.
This has a nice combination, so it doesn't feel like you're just approaching a massive parking lot. You don't realize what it is until you get inside of it.
Yeah, I agree. So let's see.
Probably skip ahead. There are other detailed
the
sheets
next
there.
slide.
There's some renderings as well.
So this is on the top. There's a section through the main street, and it shows kind of the generous width of the sidewalk, the kind of tree band, collector band, where bike parking and things like that, litter receptacles would be. And then the angled parking in the street. And what we're proposing is bringing in some catenary lights, which are kind of like commercial versions of backyard overhead lights. They're actually light fixtures on metal suspended cables. So it just creates this kind of nice feel for this kind of special commercial street. And if you scroll down, there's just some examples of some of those lights over streets. And then we also are interested in integrating stormwater practices in some of the islands like we did on St. Paul Street there. You can kind of see. So really integrating everything together.
Quick question. In the upper right corner of what I'm looking at right now, is that a biker next to the cafe?
Oh, yeah, he shouldn't be doing that.
Can't stop these people.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I get what you're. I don't really have an answer. It's not a strong criticism, but it's interesting when I look at. You're obviously trying to create a community space and have wide sidewalks for room for tables or putting merchandise out, but at the same time, it's still servicing car culture. And I'm not saying get rid of it because that's not my personal inclination, but it's trying to thread the needle a little bit. And boy, it's the kind of thing of like, well, put it this way. At some point, somebody made the decision to create Church Street Marketplace, right?
Yep.
And we have a great asset in the city of Burlington for that. And maybe this isn't appropriate. Maybe that's going to happen more on, 40 years down the road when everybody's screaming out about the traffic over on Market Street. There'll be a call to make it pedestrian only. But I just, it's all the stuff of like, it's almost a thing of like, if there's enough of things where this is truly a destination, it does work at over at the Majestic Theater and all that. Is that back before COVID, you would park a half block away or a block away to walk to Majestic 10. So if this really becomes happening and vibing and all this stuff we're talking about, then the cars really shouldn't be there. There should be a hell of a lot less of them. Because you think of the cars backing out and people are trying to crawl through.
Yeah, I think it's like
these... but all this vibrancy and people are walking back and forth across the street.
It's actually, it's really interesting that you're bringing this up because we had a pretty lively discussion about all this internally. And that's why I keep referring to it as a living street. It's a concept that could allow for the street to be closed down, or at least parts of it. And what Jeff has done with kind of changing the pavements at the crosswalks and at the parking areas, you can easily de-auto parts of the this living street, whether it's temporarily for a craft fair, or if it becomes so, just in 5 years when this, or 10 years when the last building permit is pulled, that there's such a demand here for outdoor space. It could easily be converted
and
to part of a plaza space.
Church Street started out as an experiment, and then they made the decision to permanently, make it pedestrian. So I think, I see the street more like St. Paul Street in Burlington, where they close it down for special events, but on a daily, weekday basis, they allow cars.
Right. Well, the other thing that makes Burlington work, and I know I shouldn't be saying this, I've been working for Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission, but it's got parking garages. And we're not here, obviously. It's not 40,000 people with all these tourists crawling through. But eventually you want to get it to a situation where people go, I'm not going to try to find the perfect parking space. I'm just going to go to the garage that's a half a block away.
Well, Burlington.
Is there an accommodation for that?
Yeah.
If this truly becomes a destination place.
Burlington's lucky to have one of a handful of the successful, truly pedestrian streets. They tried it in a lot of cities and it didn't work. So.
Yeah. But is there a place off-site? And then I'll stop on this point. But is there a place half a block away where people would park instead of trying to find the perfect space?
I mean, there is a lot of on-street parking throughout the neighborhood.
Well, I think it's also worth pointing out that we do have a bunch of structured parking underneath the buildings. So it's not just street parking that we're providing here. There's a lot more parking than is shown.
Right, and the question is, can that accommodate visitors? As opposed to assigned parking spots for a resident.
Yeah, we believe that the uses and the parking proposed in the concept are balanced. So the parking is sufficient for the uses that are there, and for the future, full development of the site. So I think that would be the answer there. There wouldn't be a need for a parking garage because there wouldn't be any more space to develop beyond what is there, and what is there is parked in our opinion sufficiently.
And I think it's also worth pointing out that this zone is the commercial one, limited retail. So we are working within a construct of an existing zone that has its limited retail.
Yeah, and that's what I was trying to get to, is that retail, like office use, there's no restriction on size, I believe, but retail in this zoning district is limited to 5,000 square feet per tenant and 15,000 square feet per building. So, you can't look at these buildings and say, oh, they're going to be, a Whole Foods, or they're going to be a Majestic Theater. That wouldn't be allowed in this zoning district.
Yeah, and then I don't know how this works and what are traffic planners and urban planners doing, but where are all the e-bikes going to park?
We're
generally
have that figured out in the final proposals.
Yeah.
Well, and that's where we want to talk about what of this is conceptual, and I'm kind of trying to pull on you guys to talk about. One thing that you told me is that, the orientation is you're committed to, but maybe the building exact locations are not. So I want to hear more about that.
I think if we kind of, maybe spend about a half hour on this, there are a couple of renderings that probably make sense to look at, and then I can touch on some of that stuff.
I think Frank had a question.
Yeah, I want to generally support the spirit of what Dan's been saying. I found the angled parking jarring. I find when I'm in Burlington, for example, angled parking is objectionable every place it exists. I also, if these are I'm not sure what the difference between a living street and a complete street is. I mean, I saw your bicycle where you acknowledged it didn't belong, but I don't see where bicycles do belong on this street.
And that's, this is a early concept. We haven't integrated it fully into the whole transportation plan.
So I would sum up my comment by saying get rid of the angled cars, hide them somewhere else, put in some bicycles.
If we go to head-in parking, we wouldn't get enough parking spaces with parallel, and if we go to head-in 90-degree, we're going to lose sidewalk space. So
I wasn't talking about head-in. I was saying, parallel parking, and I'm gathering that the idea of a parking garage is not in the picture. Right?
Don't look at me.
No, it's a parking. This is not going to support a parking structure. And I think, the trade-off is you have a massive parking lot somewhere down the road and everybody walks into, again, sort of a Maple Tree Place situation where it's surrounded by a sea of parking, or you have it integrated here into what we think is a really attractive and well-positioned site plan. But again, the purpose of this is it's not going to be built exactly like this. We're committing to a skeleton as opposed to a specific building or specific 100%.
This would be a road with parking on both sides.
This may complicate your thinking on this a little bit, but not all members of this board are in agreement that you shouldn't have angled parking because the parking, for instance, in St. Albans works beautifully.
Yep.
And I lived in a certain neighborhood in New York where that parking actually enhanced. It was one of the ritziest places outside of New York City itself from a neighborhood perspective. And I personally believe that kind of parking works in this sort of environment, just so you know. So we have some discussion ahead of us on that.
Yeah.
And just one point of clarification between a living street and a complete street. There is some kind of nuance. There's a nuance of difference between them. Complete street provides a separate zone for each different use. So pedestrian, bike, cars. Whereas a living street essentially creates an area that everyone is allowed. So it slows everybody down, and we chose that approach because of the ability to be able to be nimble and maybe close parts of it down for events and other things. It's also called a woenerf. It's a Dutch word for a living street.
Have you thought through any accommodations for the theoretical electrically powered public transportation vehicles that are going to be on this living street?
That's I can't wait to get into that kind of detail if we get that far. There's plenty of spaces for whether they're divvy bikes or e-bikes. We've set aside, and one of the comments earlier is just, really being attuned to the space between each of these different buildings and how we can activate them. And one really good way to activate them is providing areas for, the divvy bike or an e-bike or
Could I just make a suggestion too, that could we just get through the presentation and then we can ask questions, because otherwise we're never going to get through it.
Sure.
Yeah, I think, why don't we just jump, I think, Jeff, do you have other specific things to touch on?
There's a blow up of the access down to Kimball and on the next page.
Yeah, I think that's really important because that really sold it for us as staff. So one more page, I think, right?
No, that's it.
Okay. Well, I was talking about the cross section.
Oh. Well, yeah, I think that's next.
With the parking. Okay.
So one of the things, we're looking at is access from 25 feet down at Kennedy and Kimball. And, it really didn't make sense to have that circulation at the corner. It was constrained and kind of hard to navigate. So we decided that we would tier the landscape at the corner, providing some retaining walls and then maybe some like a sizable public art piece, but then have kind of a switchback off of Kennedy, which it just happened to work out mathematically to get ADA access up And then we were able to integrate it with the landing of that stair that lines up with the streetscape. So it seemed to kind of work well in this location. And then there's some images of what that might look like. On the left is a stair and ramp I did in Cincinnati a long time ago, where the ramp meets up with the stair landings at each kind of interval. And then that other plan is the enlargement of that plaza retail space, just kind of showing a blow up of that area that we would have built-in planners, built-in seating, some sort of central focus. But, you know, it's a place kind of off the beaten path that people could hang out in. And if that little retail building turns out to be dining, I think it works really well to have that kind of juxtaposition.
Well, with the development of this size, is there a need, maybe this is a separate topic and not part of what we focus on, but for instance, where would the fire station be that would serve this? I mean, is that going to be part of this area, or?
I think it would be able to be covered by the municipal service. I think that would be, all the roads would have to accommodate that.
Yeah, the fire department has reviewed these plans and doesn't see any issue with ability to serve from their existing stations.
Thank you.
Can we hop to the next slide?
Yeah.
Going back to that, the thing labeled retail pavilion, the previous item, at first I thought, gee, maybe what he's got in mind, instead of retail pavilion, I was thinking theater/bandstand. Is there any, do you have in mind? I mean, it seems like an almost ideal place for some sort of public performance space rather than a retail area. I mean,
I think it can be sort of any of the above. I think that, a pavilion, kind of an amphitheater, that's a concept.
So that thing labeled retail pavilion, you're not married to any particular thing in there?
No, I mean, it could be a pop-up thing at one point of the year. It could be, a community bandstand at another point of the year. I think it's a variety of uses. It's just meant to say this is kind of the central gathering space, and there's some pavilion there.
Yeah. So this section just illustrates the grade change from Kennedy up to the parking lot up above. So this was what allowed us to have technically parking facing a street, but you can't see it from anywhere unless you're on it.
Right, so this is in the staff report. This gets a little tricky, but when you have multiple buildings on a lot, you can have parking to the side of the buildings that's equal to no more than, under the rules that these guys are under, half of the building width at the street. And so the question in the staff report, which we may or may not get to tonight, is whether the board would consider the C1LR blocks, the orange block and the yellow block, as a lot, even though it's not technically a lot. It's a PUD, so it's like 4 or 5 lots together. And if the board were able to consider all of those together, then this parking along the street, which really isn't visible from Kennedy Drive because it's 20 feet up, would be allowed under the rules.
Yeah, if you skip forward a couple slides, there's a great rendering of that corner. We can skip that one for now. That's the corner of Kennedy and Kimball rendered out with the buildings and the wall and the ramp and the art and all the other sort of.
And it's a really important point to make this space work, because as Joe mentioned, we did a variety of different iterations earlier on, but it was always kind of constrained by the fact that you had these shoulders to the street to create that border of building, and then you had to see a parking that serviced it and didn't really create a sense of space or a sense of place like we were trying to. We think we've kind of threaded the needle here nicely.
Yeah, if you go back a couple from this one, you can see we updated the aerial rendering to include all of the conceptual elements of the plan that Joe was speaking about. And then, to Marla's point, maybe we can just jump into sort of what are we seeking here with all of this. And so if you skip forward a couple slides, unfortunately, that one is a rendering of the corner of Old Farm Road and Kimball Avenue. Obviously, the buildings are going to look a bit different. when they're not gray boxes.
Looks like a penitentiary.
But it's just meant to kind of show the scale and form. Those buildings are similar in size and further back than the ones that were recently approved for phase one of Hillside. So the architecture does matter.
But it's also important because this area of Kimball, Kimball is a commercial thoroughfare versus when you're on the Kennedy side and you're facing, there's the condo complexes that are further back. So it sort of makes sense that these are proud and they're facing commercial buildings.
But that's Old Farm Road coming toward it, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Will the design of these buildings be up to who the commercial entities ultimately, or to you?
Well, we're putting some parameters in place as part of this structure to create, some sort of parameters. So it's sort of akin somewhat to a form-based code system where there are certain architectural requirements that would be in place to kind of give you guys the security that you need to grant us some of the things we're asking for.
So the main sort of highlights of that, if you skip ahead, I can touch on really quickly. And we provided a regulatory framework. So these two pictures are that framework. You don't have to read it all here. It gets into stuff like, the first floor height, what should it be? What percentage of that first floor should be glazing versus another material? How many doors should you have on a public street, right? Like what's an appropriate number of pedestrian entrances over how many feet? We talk about things like overall glazing from the, for the entire primary facade. There's some staff comments, sort of going over what a primary facade means. I think we can talk about those when we get there, but essentially we're seeking to put in place this regulatory framework that you guys, can review, which sort of details these little aspects of the building, right? What the glazing, the storefront, the entrances, where these things can work. And the second piece that we're looking to get approved is on the next slide, and this was our first attempt at laying it out. But if you sort of skip ahead to the next one, what we've sort of tried to do is say, a lot of times you guys will give us a permit that has a bunch of goals in it, right? So the next project that's proposed should do these things. And that was sort of what we tried to lay out here with these 9 items. So the project would provide a central pedestrian-oriented streetscape to foster community, create a sense of place within the C1LR, design elements to be of similar aesthetic to outlined in Exhibit 15, which are the images that Jeff was presenting to. So basically saying the project, if these waivers and height adjustments that you guys are putting in place are to be honored, the projects that come forward have to do these things. Is essentially, and this was our first list. You guys could suggest additional items to it. I thought it did a pretty good job of sort of summing up what we were able to commit to Marla's question.
Is this new or is this in the original application?
This is new, so it was in the August 19th letter we submitted.
Cool. So I'll just make sure the board really looks at this in detail before your next meeting.
And that would be, so that the project features a central design element, plaza or gathering space in the spirit of the images. It focuses on services, commercial development on the northern block, and residential senior housing hospitality on the southern, right? So it's that concept plan has a bunch of buildings on it and concepts on it, but whether those buildings are the size they are in that concept or they're a little bit smaller or they're not, it's saying these are the sort of overarching concepts that are going to be there. Like that central organizing street, if these things are going to be in effect and these height waivers are granted, that needs to be accommodated. I mean, does it shift? Could it have a little bend in it? Could it be oriented a little differently? Yes, but conceptually that would be sort of how future projects would be sort of looked at.
By the way, on just dimensions, trying to visualize, what's the curve to? Well, I don't know if there is a curve, but you know what I mean. What's the traveled way of this central street, the central organizing street? The dimension.
Just the street is 24, but you mean from building to building?
No, I mean I'm talking about the central, the living street. What's the width of that living street, the traveled way?
The road is 24.
That
That doesn't
dimension right
include the
there.
parking spaces.
No, the parking's in addition to that.
So you have 12-foot lanes basically on each side, right?
Well, that. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, to finish it out, the sidewalk is 15 feet. I believe this tree band is 4 or 5.
Do you need 12 feet to accommodate the angled parking? 12 is big. 12 is an interstate.
Oh, you mean for the travelway? That can probably go down. Scott, do you remember what it was?
Between, I've got it open here, between the buildings, from building face to building face, it's 98 feet. From back of curb to back of curb, so that would include the parking lanes, is 57 feet.
All right.
And Scott, do you remember?
Yeah, I think
we might have gone
a
down.
lot of the lower density residential stuff will go with the 10-foot lanes, but typically when we get into commercial, we use the 12s, unless it's only one way. Then
So as a practical matter,
The thing about as difficult as diagonal parking sometimes is, it allows us to reduce the travel lane because you're not backing straight out, you're backing out at an angle, so you're able to ratchet down the width of the drive lanes.
but at 12 feet, you also have actually ample room for bicycles, for example.
Yes.
You could have an informal bike lane along the.
Or formal.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if
Yeah,
it's a
and
good
even-
idea to bike along the back of angled
Yeah.
parked cars.
Yeah, that's the beauty of this design is that it is a living street and it is an organizing spine for the development, but it's the axis on the south is the dog park and on the north is a building. So it's not a high speed through drive, and the intent is to slow down traffic as much as we can because you want people to stop the park, or you want people to see the activity.
Yeah, to kind of balance Frank's comment with John's comment, I think in the Burlington scenario where you're driving down Main Street, yeah, the angled parking is really challenging because you have a through road coming in that's funneling all traffic into downtown Burlington. That's really problematic. But if you go over to St. Paul Street where there's more of a street presence and pedestrian presence, it actually works a lot better. And this is even a slower speed environment than St. Paul.
Yeah, it's not as objectionable in St. Paul as it is on Main.
Right. So just a time check, it's 9:47, and I still want to open it up for public comment, but are there any, before we not close, but conclude tonight, are there any comments or things you want us to go away with?
Yeah, I think two final things is obviously what we're trying to do here, which has been a common theme, in all the years we've been in front of you guys through permitting, is balance the security that you guys need to make sure that we're providing you with a high quality product when we're asking you for a variety of waivers. And we're trying to balance the fact that we're committing to a tremendous amount of infrastructure and setting aside green space and all these public amenities. And so there has to be some sort of balance. You're making commitment to us, we're making commitment to you, and so we're trying to balance that. And then the second point I'll make is that this is really the kind of the culmination of the vision that we've been pitching for 7 years now, which is a variety of living styles, a walkable, pedestrian oriented development that has for sale ownership, apartment rentals, it has townhomes, it has this transition townhomes, and then you have the higher density piece as well as the retail and amenities to support it. So it's really kind of the vision coming to fruition. And I think I'm really excited. I think we're all really excited about the way this is panning out. So we appreciate everybody's patience in getting to this point.
Anything else? Any parting comments before we conclude?
Maybe just reiterate or clarify again. I mean, the essential, the biggest aspect of what we're seeking at this level is to secure that design guide, which includes height allowances for buildings to be up to 5 stories over parking with a step back for the 5th story, and proposes those glazing standards and some setback reductions. And the question then is, that list of 9 or 10 things, the central organizing feature, maybe they're saying we need to adequately accommodate for bikes or for, in future applications, other things that have come up that you want to, add to this list. But how do we evaluate these future plans, in order to grant this waiver now? If you want that waiver secure in the future, your project needs to achieve these goals. And I think because the waiver is important because the height limit in this area is like 30 feet. And the level of infrastructure investment that we're committing to for the 155 homes far exceeds the ability of those homes to fund it. And so the ability to develop this zone in the manner that we're showing is important to the project. And that's the piece we're seeking to solidify now, that height waiver, the setback waivers, and then what's the framework that makes all that work. And I think the only sort of remaining question that would be great to, the parking issue that Marla had brought up, the frontage and viewing it block by block. I think if there was one last thing that we heard from you guys, your opinion on, that would probably be helpful just in terms of finalizing the proposals.
Okay, great. So I'm going to open it up for public comment, and
I have one more quick.
Sure, go ahead, Dan.
Comment. Question for Joe: is there anything about again, this is conceptual, that is unique to, I'll just call it winter cities urban design? There's ways of trying to expand the envelope into the winter months for a vibrant pedestrian environment. Are there examples of things that you've incorporated that are unique to, obviously this is in Minneapolis with the sky bridges or Montreal with the underground, but is there any features that can be drawn in to expand that use of the zone in the winter months?
Well, yeah, there are a lot of things, and we've learned a lot actually since COVID on how to really create a 12-month outdoor zone out in front of these areas. And we haven't gotten into detail about it, but with some of the overhead, perhaps there's pergolas that could be outfitted with heaters, things like that. But nothing more than that. I think the most dynamic spaces that we've done and I've seen are the ones that are essentially convertible spaces that people are creative and figure out a way. When you try to force a design like Minneapolis, it took 20 years to figure out what to do with them, and they're still trying to figure it out.
And I think being flexible too. I think what we've learned is you don't design a space for one purpose, that you design it to accommodate a lot of different activities. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're going to go to public comment, but am I correct in thinking they're back here not at our next meeting, but the meeting after?
That was going to be my suggestion.
Okay. Does that work for you guys? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Let's open it up for public comment. Are there any members of the public online or on the phone who would like to comment?
There are no members of the public online or on the phone.
Okay.
Period.
And there's nobody here. Okay. All right. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for being here. And we'll see you back here in about a month.
So we're going to have to take a motion to continue
Yes, we are.
I move to continue this application.
to October 6th.
Okay.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion to continue to October 6th, say aye.
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 Opposed? No? Okay, the motion's carried.
Thank you all.
And we have a set of minutes to
Thank you.
review. People had a
Thanks,
chance.
everybody.
Thank you again. Have people had a chance to look at the minutes?
I did.
Would anyone like to propose?
Just remember you have members online still.
Pardon?
Just remember you have members online. They have to hear you still.
Okay, yeah. Do I have a motion about the minutes? What's the date? I know I looked at them, but August 2nd?
Motion to approve minutes from August 2nd.
Okay, second? I'll second.
Second.
All right, we all second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 The minutes
Aye.
are approved. All right.
Did you want to do another business? You have a question for me?
I am just curious for an update about the dog park. It's gotten a lot of coverage. A lot of people are talking about it.
Yeah, in the context of Dawn's question to me was, people are blaming the DRB. And we thought it might make sense to kind of explain what had happened and what the DRB's role is. So when the DRB reviewed the dog park, and if this might be, you might all already know this, when the DRB reviewed the dog park, the DRB's authorities was limited to the wetland impacts. The dog park is largely a fence, and the fences in South Burlington that are under 4 feet are subject to our rules, but not to permitting. So when they went out there and they installed the fence not in the location that was on the plans, that's really incidental to the DRB's review, and so we wouldn't have them come back for new permitting because the fence is in a different location unless the wetland impacts were different. I've seen the field delineation of where they actually installed it. I've seen the as-built. The wetland impacts are different on one side, not on the other. We are not taking any enforcement action on that until they kind of decide where they want to go from here. They may be modifying it to go back to the originally proposed wetland impacts. And if so, then there's nothing that you guys need to do. If they end up keeping the impacts, they might come back for an after the fact permit to modify their approved impacts. But the portion that was the largest change is actually outside the DRB's jurisdiction, and the change that's in the field has nothing to do with your decision.
Thank you. And who's they? The dog park committee?
So it was designed by the dog park committee, but when DPW staff went to install it with the help of surveyors, the surveyors found that the limits were within an easement that had been granted to common routes, and so they had to squash it north somewhat, and then I think there were some topographic challenges that squashed it east to west a little bit.
Okay.
Ledge or something like that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for that update.
So don't take any blame.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.